Welcome back. What you're about to hear aren't just stories, they're memories, echoing through the fog of war. Before we begin, like the video, subscribe and tell me where are you from and what time are you watching. Now, get comfortable. The rain is already falling, and the stories are on their way. Master Sergeant James Holloway, 34 years old, 5th Special Forces Group, Airborne, born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The first rocket hit just after midnight, a whistling shriek followed by a deafening explosion that shook our entire firebase. Concrete dust rained down from the ceiling of our command post as the radios crackled with frantic reports. The second and third rockets came almost simultaneously, their impacts sending tremors through the mountain outpost. I was already moving, grabbing my plate carrier and helmet in the darkness, muscle memory guiding my hands. The power had been knocked out with the first strike. "Contact! South Ridge! Multiple positions!" someone shouted from the perimeter. Satterim. Night erupted in gunfire as I emerged from the command bunker. The distinctive chatter of PKM machine guns echoed across the valley, answered by the sharper cracks of our M4 carbines. Green tracer rounds arced toward our positions, while red American tracers streaked outward in response. Through my night vision, I could see dozens of muzzle flashes along the ridgeline 300 meters south of Firebase Echo. "They're probing the wire, southwest corner," came a call over the radio. McCarthy's voice strained but controlled. I sprinted along the inner perimeter, passing Afghan commandos rushing to their defensive positions. My team had spent 8 months mentoring these fighters, and now everything depended on how well they'd learned. Another rocket impacted near the generator building, sending shrapnel pinging off the concrete barriers around me. The smell of cordite and burning diesel filled the air as I reached the southwest fighting position. Sierra 1-1. This is Echo Main. We have QRF inbound, estimated 30 mics, the radio announced. 30 minutes. If the Taliban breached our perimeter, we wouldn't last 5. Through my night vision, I could make out dark figures moving in the rocks below our position. They were closer than they'd ever gotten before. Much closer. This wasn't a probe. This was the real thing. Our journey to Firebase Echo had begun 4 months earlier, in May of 2009. My 12-man Operational Detachment Alpha, ODA team, had been tasked with establishing a presence in the remote Waigal Valley of Nuristan province, one of the most isolated and contested regions in Afghanistan. The mission was twofold: disrupt Taliban movement through the valley into neighboring Kunar province and build relationships with the local villages. "It's the absolute edge of nowhere," our battalion commander had explained during the briefing at Bagram. "Previous units have made limited inroads, but we've never maintained a permanent presence. This will be the first." The map showed the reality of our situation. Firebase Echo sat on a rocky promontory overlooking the valley floor, surrounded on 3 sides by steep mountains that soared to 12,000 feet. The single road in was little more than a goat path cut into the mountainside, passable only by the most rugged vehicles. The nearest significant American force was at Forward Operating Base Right, over 30 kilometers away through some of the most challenging terrain in Afghanistan. "You'll be operating with minimal support," the commander continued. "Limited air assets, artillery out of range. You'll have a company of Afghan commandos attached, plus normal fire support coordination authorities. Beyond that, you're on your own." Captain Miller, our team leader, nodded. "Rules of engagement? Standard counterinsurgency parameters. We're there to protect the population, not antagonize them. Make friends, build trust, gather intelligence." My weapons sergeant, Dave McCarthy, leaned over to me. "Great. They're sending us to the middle of Taliban country to make friends." I smiled tightly. McCarthy wasn't wrong. Nuristan had been a hotbed of insurgent activity since the earliest days of the war. Its remoteness, combined with the fiercely independent nature of its people, made it natural territory for the Taliban and their allies. We arrived at Firebase Echo via helicopter in the pre-dawn darkness. The firebase itself was primitive compared to the established FOBs elsewhere in the country. Concrete barriers and HESCO walls formed the perimeter, enclosing a collection of plywood buildings, tents, and sandbag bunkers. The previous unit, a eyes-high platoon from the 10th Mountain Division, looked exhausted as they greeted us. "Welcome to paradise," their lieutenant said with visible relief. "You guys are our ticket home." The changeover took 3 days, during which we learned the harsh realities of our new home. Water was limited, requiring strict conservation. Power came from generators that frequently broke down. The local villages were a complex mix of friendly, neutral, and hostile. Most importantly, the Taliban were watching our every move from the mountains that loomed over us. They probed the perimeter about twice a week, the outgoing intelligence sergeant explained. Usually just harassment fire from the ridgelines. They've never mounted a serious assault. "Any specific threats?" I asked. He shrugged. "The usual. Local informants tell us they're planning a major attack every other day. We've heard it so often nobody believes it anymore." After the 10th Mountain guys departed, we settled into our routine. Days were filled with patrols into the surrounding villages, meetings with local elders, and training the Afghan commandos. Nights were punctuated by sporadic gunfire from the hills, usually just enough to disrupt our sleep. Captain Miller established a robust defense plan with interlocking fields of fire, pre-planned mortar targets, and a quick reaction force ready to respond to any breach. We improved the fortifications where we could, adding depth to the perimeter and hardening the command bunker. The Afghan commandos, to their credit, were enthusiastic participants, recognizing that their lives depended on the strength of our defenses as much as ours did. Life at Echo fell into a strange rhythm. We conducted key leader engagements in the morning, patrols in the afternoon, and waited for the nightly harassment fire after dark. The villages remained cautiously neutral, neither embracing our presence nor actively supporting the Taliban. Local children became a common sight around our perimeter, begging for candy and water. Some of the men would stop to talk, though conversations rarely ventured beyond pleasantries. In our 3rd month, things began to change. First, the children stopped coming. Then the village elders became less willing to meet. Our interpreter, a man from Jalalabad who had worked with American forces for years, grew increasingly nervous. "The people are afraid," he explained one evening. "Taliban fighters have been moving through the high valleys at night, many fighters with heavy weapons." We increased our vigilance, doubling guards and running extra patrols. Intelligence reports confirmed unusual movement in the region, though satellite imagery showed nothing concrete. Then, in early September, a patrol from 2nd Squad made contact with a small group of fighters 5 kilometers from the base. The brief firefight left 2 Taliban dead and yielded a cache of weapons and communication equipment. The radio we recovered contained frequencies and code words suggesting a coordinated operation was being planned. More concerning was a detailed hand-drawn map of Firebase Echo, complete with annotations about our defensive positions and routines. Someone had been watching us very carefully. "They're going to hit us," Captain Miller concluded during our team meeting. "Not just the usual harassment, something bigger. Question is when," McCarthy added. We spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Additional ammunition was flown in by helicopter. Defensive positions were reinforced. Communication protocols were established with headquarters for emergency support. The Afghan commandos, sensing the growing tension, conducted their own reconnaissance missions into the surrounding hills, reporting increased Taliban movement. The waiting was the hardest part. Every night brought the possibility of attack, keeping us in a constant state of alertness that slowly drained our energy and focus. False alarms became common as nervous sentries reported shadows moving in the darkness. Sleep came in brief intervals, interrupted by radio calls and the occasional burst of gunfire from the perimeter. After days of anticipation, the attack, when it finally came, was almost a relief. The first rocket struck just after midnight on September 27th. I had been in the command bunker reviewing patrol reports when the world erupted in noise and chaos. What followed was a coordinated assault unlike anything Firebase Echo had experienced before. From the southwest fighting position, I could see the Taliban fighters advancing in waves, using the rocky terrain for cover as they moved toward our perimeter. McCarthy was already there with 2 Afghan commandos firing his M4 in controlled bursts. "They're hitting us from 3 sides," he shouted over the gunfire. "At least 50 fighters that I can see." I keyed my radio. "Sierra 1-1 to all positions. Concentrate fire on the southwest approach. They're trying to breach the wire. The night air filled with the sound of our M24 machine guns and Mark 19 grenade launchers responding. The Afghan commandos, to their credit, held their positions, pouring accurate fire into the advancing Taliban. The attackers seemed undeterred, continuing to push forward despite mounting casualties. Sierra 1-1, this is Echo Maine, Captain. Miller's voice came through my earpiece. Mortars are ready. Grid coordinates? I quickly relayed the coordinates for the heaviest concentration of enemy fighters, and moments later, our 60mm mortars began dropping rounds just outside our perimeter. The explosions temporarily disrupted the assault, but the fighters quickly regrouped and continued their advance. They really want this place, McCarthy muttered beside me, slamming a fresh magazine into his rifle. He was right. The determination of the attack suggested this wasn't just another harassment operation. The Taliban were committing significant resources to overrun Firebase Echo, far more than they'd ever risked in previous engagements. A new sound cut through the cacophony of battle, the distinctive whump-whump-whump of helicopter rotors. I looked, up to see the silhouette of an AH-64 Apache attack helicopter emerging from the darkness, its 30mm chain gun already firing into the Taliban positions. A second Apache appeared moments later, Hellfire missiles streaking from its pylons toward targets on the distant ridgeline. QRF is 15 minutes out, Captain Miller announced over the radio. Hold what you've got. The Apache gunships turned, the tide of the battle, their thermal imaging systems allowing them to identify and engage Taliban fighters with devastating precision. The assault faltered as the insurgents sought cover from the aerial onslaught, their advance stalling 50 meters from our perimeter. In the lull that followed, we assessed our situation. 3 Afghan commandos had been wounded, and one of our communication specialists had taken shrapnel from a rocket. The perimeter remained intact, but several sections of the outer defenses had been damaged by RPG fire. The promised quick reaction force arrived in 4 CH-47 Chinooks, bringing a platoon of infantry and additional ammunition. By dawn, the Taliban had withdrawn to their mountain sanctuaries, leaving their dead scattered across the approaches to the Firebase. The battle for Firebase Echo became a turning point in our deployment. The Taliban had committed significant resources to the attack and failed, losing dozens of fighters in the process. Intelligence later revealed that the assault had been led by a high-ranking commander who believed capturing an American outpost would provide a propaganda victory similar to the fall of Firebase Keating, which would occur just 1 week later, in neighboring Kamdesh. In the weeks that followed, our position strengthened. Additional forces were assigned to Echo, including a platoon of infantry and enhanced air support. The local villages, seeing that we had withstood the Taliban's best effort, became more cooperative, providing information about insurgent movements and identifying fighters hiding among the civilian population. But the cost was high. The Firebase itself remained a target, enduring almost daily indirect fire attacks. Patrols outside the wire regularly encountered IEDs and ambushes. 3 more Afghan commandos and 1 American soldier would die before our deployment ended. On our final day at Firebase Echo, I stood on the perimeter wall watching the sun set behind the western mountains. The beauty of the landscape contrasted sharply with the violence it had witnessed. In the valley below, the villages were settling, in for the night, cookfires visible as tiny points of light in the gathering darkness. McCarthy joined me, lighting a cigarette. Think it made any difference? Us being here? I considered the question carefully. For a little while. In this little corner of nowhere. He nodded, understanding the temporary nature of our presence. Another unit would replace us, continuing. The endless cycle of deployment and withdrawal. The villagers would continue their lives, navigating the dangerous space between Taliban threats and American protection. And the mountains would remain, silent witnesses to a conflict as old as humanity itself. That's something, I guess, McCarthy said finally, flicking his cigarette into the dirt. We stood in silence as darkness enveloped the valley, the first stars appearing overhead. In the distance, a single gunshot echoed off the mountainside, a reminder that in this harsh, beautiful land, peace remained as elusive as the shadows that moved through its ancient hills. Technical Sergeant Michael Radcliffe, 31 years old, 24th Special Tactics Squadron, U.S. Air Force Pararescue, born in Portland, Oregon. The HH-60 Pave Hawk shuddered violently as we took fire from the valley below. Red, tracers streaked past my window, the Taliban's welcome party for our medevac mission. In the cabin behind me, Staff Sergeant Wilson and I exchanged glances. We'd been in this situation too many times before. The pilot banked hard to the right, throwing me against my harness as our door gunner returned fire, the GAU 2-1 minigun thundering in response. Pedro 2-1 taking fire, taking evasive action, our pilot announced over the radio. LZ is hot. Repeat, LZ is hot. Copy Pedro 2-1, came the response from the embattled Marines below. We have 3 urgent surgical, 1 priority. Taliban in buildings to the northeast, approximately 50 meters from our position. We're marking with smoke now. Through the open door, I could see a green smoke grenade billowing from a mud-walled compound. Around it, the distinctive muzzle flashes of M4 carbines indicated the Marine defensive positions. Beyond them, at least 3 enemy firing points poured rounds toward both the Marines and our circling helicopter. We need immediate evac. The Marine RTO's voice cracked with urgency. Mendoza's bleeding out. I checked my medical kit one last time and looked at Wilson. The decision wasn't really a decision at all. That others may live wasn't just our motto, it was our purpose. The rules of engagement stated we shouldn't land in a hot LZ without armed escort. But those rules had been written by people, safely behind desks in Bagram or Kandahar. Down there, a 19-year-old kid from somewhere like Ohio or Texas was bleeding out in the Afghan dirt. Tell them we're coming in, I said to the pilot. Roger that, he responded without hesitation. Crew, prepare for hot insertion. As the helicopter descended through the curtain of enemy fire, I took a deep breath and silently recited the pararescue prayer. Lord, give me the strength to save those in harm's way, the courage to face danger without fear, and the wisdom to know when I can't save them all. 27 hours earlier, I had been asleep in my bunk at Camp Bastion when the alarm sounded. The Mediterranean-style base in Helmand Province had been my home for the past 4 months of my deployment. As a Pararescueman, or PJ, with the 24th Special Tactics Squadron, I was part of a dedicated combat search and rescue team, ready to launch at a moment's notice to retrieve wounded personnel from anywhere in Regional Command Southwest. Reached the operations center 2 minutes after the alarm, still pulling on my flight suit. Major Garrett, our detachment commander, was already reviewing mission details with our flight crew. Marines from 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines are conducting clearing operations in the Sangin district, he explained, pointing to a map on the digital display. They've encountered heavy resistance in several villages. Taliban fighters are dug in with machine gun positions and possible mortar teams. Command expects casualties and wants CSR assets pre-positioned for rapid response. Our 4-man PJ team would be split between 2 HH-60 Pave Hawks, call signs Pedro 2-1 and Pedro 2-2. I would fly with Staff Sergeant Wilson on 2-1, while Master Sergeant Davis and Senior Airman Rodriguez would take 2-2. The helicopters were already being prepped on the flight line, loaded with additional medical supplies for what might be a busy day. Wheels up in 15, Major Garrett concluded. Standard 24-hour rotation. Any questions? There were none. We'd done this dozens of times before. After gearing up and conducting final equipment checks, we boarded the helicopters and lifted off into the early morning darkness. Our destination was a forward arming and refueling point, FARP, near Combat Outpost Inkerman, where we would remain on standby until called forward or relieved. The sun was rising as we approached the FARP, casting long shadows across the barren landscape below. Helmand Province was a study in contrasts, fertile green zones along the river, surrounded by vast expanses of desert and rocky hills. Both environments had proven deadly for coalition forces, the green zones filled with IEDs and ambush points, the desert offering little cover from enemy observation. We touched down at 6:23, rotors still turning as we established our temporary aid station. The Marines at the outpost provided us with the latest intelligence. 3rd Battalion's operation was progressing through several villages approximately 15 kilometers to the north. Taliban resistance had been sporadic but determined. with several firefights already reported. "They're walking into a hornet's nest," commented Captain Reynolds, the pilot of Pedro 2-1. "Those villages have been Taliban strongholds since the beginning of the war." He wasn't wrong. The Sangin district had earned a reputation as one of the deadliest areas in Afghanistan, claiming more British lives during their deployment than any other region before the Marines took over responsibility. The narrow alleyways and dense compounds provided perfect defensive positions for insurgent fighters, negating much of NATO's technological advantages. The first call came at 10:42. A Marine squad had triggered an IED while moving through a narrow alley, resulting in 2 casualties with traumatic amputations. Because the area was cleared of active enemy presence, Pedro 2-2 launched immediately while we maintained our standby position at the FARP. Davis and Rodriguez returned 90 minutes later, their flight suits stained with blood despite the protective covers they wore. Both casualties had survived to handoff at the surgical facility, though one remained in critical condition. "They're moving deeper into the bad areas," Davis reported during debriefing. "The battalion commander is pressing the advance despite the casualties. He wants to clear all objectives before nightfall." The second call came at 13:47. Another IED, another launch for Pedro 2-2. This time, they returned with 3 wounded. Marines all stable but requiring evacuation to higher-level care. By late afternoon, an unsettling pattern had emerged. The Marines were encountering increasingly sophisticated IEDs and more coordinated resistance as they pushed into the heart of Taliban territory. Our sister helicopter had flown 3 missions already, while my crew remained on standby, growing, more tense with each passing hour. "They're being drawn in," Wilson observed as we monitored radio traffic. A former Army Ranger before cross-training to pararescue, he had a tactical understanding that went beyond most PJs. Classic insurgent strategy. Let them advance, bleed them with IEDs and sniper fire, then hit them when they're overextended. The radio crackled to life at 17:32 with the call we'd been anticipating and dreading. "Pedro elements, this is Viking 3-6. We are in heavy contact, multiple casualties, requesting immediate CASEVAC." Because Pedro 2-2 was still in the process of refueling from their last mission, we got the call. Within 2 minutes, we were airborne, racing toward coordinates that indicated a small village approximately 12 kilometers north of our position. En route, we received updates that painted an increasingly dire picture. A Marine platoon had been ambushed while clearing compounds, resulting in multiple casualties and an ongoing firefight. "Be advised, LZ is not secure," warned the Marine radio operator. "We are establishing a defensive perimeter but still taking heavy fire from multiple directions." This immediately presented a dilemma. Standard operating procedures dictated that medevac aircraft should not land in unsecured landing zones without armed escort, typically provided by AH-64 Apache attack helicopters. However, the nearest Apache element was engaged elsewhere, supporting another unit in contact. Waiting for escort could mean the difference between life and death for the wounded Marines. Captain Reynolds keyed his intercom. "What do you think? Those are your boots on the ground if we go in." I exchanged looks with Wilson. As PJs, we were both combat medics and special operations personnel, trained not only to treat casualties but to fight our way to them if necessary. The pararescue motto, "that others may live," wasn't just words, it was a sacred commitment. "If they've got urgent surgical cases, minutes count," I replied. "We go in." Reynolds nodded. "Command Pedro 2-1. Be advised, we are proceeding. To LZ without escort. Request immediate close air support if available. Pedro 2-1. This is Warrior Operations. Negative on KS assets at this time. Proceed with caution. QRF is spinning up, but ETA is 40+ minutes. As we approached the village, the extent of the situation became clear. The Marine platoon was pinned down in a small compound, taking fire from at least 3 directions. Green smoke marked their position, while tracer fire crisscrossed the area surrounding them. Our door gunner began engaging identified enemy positions as we made our approach, the minigun's distinctive sound providing momentary suppression. The pilot brought us in fast and hard, flaring at the last moment to settle into the small courtyard, within the Marine perimeter. The moment our wheels touched ground, Wilson and I were out the door, medical bags in hand, rushing toward the casualties as our crew chief provided covering fire. 4 Marines lay in the center of the compound, being attended by a corpsman who looked barely old enough to shave. His face and uniform were covered in blood, his eyes wide with a combination of fear and determination. 3 urgent surgical, 1 priority, he shouted over the sound of gunfire. Mendoza took one through the femoral artery. I've got a tourniquet on, but it's not holding. Jackson has a chest wound, tension pneumothorax. I've decompressed once, but it's rebuilding. Guzman took shrapnel to the abdomen. Possible liver involvement. Peterson has a through and through to the shoulder. Stable for now. Wilson and I immediately triaged, focusing on the most critical first. I moved to Mendoza, checking the tourniquet that was indeed failing to completely occlude the femoral artery. Blood pulsed around it with each heartbeat, creating an expanding pool beneath the young Marine. I immediately applied a second tourniquet higher on the leg, effectively stopping the bleeding, then established IV access to begin fluid resuscitation. Wilson had moved to Jackson, reinserting a chest tube to relieve the building pressure that threatened to collapse his lung and compromise his heart function. Around us, Marines maintained a defensive perimeter, returning fire at enemy positions that seemed to be closing in despite our helicopter's suppressive fire. "We need to move now," the platoon commander shouted. "They're trying to flank our eastern side." Working with practiced efficiency, Wilson and I prepared the casualties for transport. The helicopter crew chief had brought out the rescue litters, and together with several Marines, we loaded the wounded aboard. As the last casualty was secured, a barrage of RPG fire erupted from a building approximately 75 meters to our east. 1 rocket streaked just over our rotor disc, impacting the wall behind us and showering everyone with debris. "Time to go," Reynolds announced over the radio. As we lifted off, I was already working on Mendoza, establishing a second IV line while monitoring his vitals. The young Marine's face was ashen from blood loss, his pulse rapid and thready. Wilson moved between the other casualties, prioritizing interventions based on the constantly changing status of each patient. "Mendoza's crashing," I called out, noting the precipitous drop in his blood pressure. I immediately began administering blood products from our onboard supply, while simultaneously preparing a more secure airway. The helicopter banked and weaved as it departed the hot zone, complicating every medical procedure. The 20-minute flight to the forward surgical team at Combat Outpost Inkerman became a desperate race against time. Mendoza went into cardiac arrest once, requiring CPR that I performed while kneeling awkwardly in the confined space of the helicopter cabin. Wilson managed to stabilize Jackson's breathing and began assessing Guzman's abdominal injuries, packing the wound to control internal bleeding. When we touched down at the surgical facility, a trauma team was waiting. We moved the casualties quickly, providing rapid handover reports to the receiving medical staff. Mendoza was rushed immediately to the operating room, while the others were triaged into the treatment bay. Hours later, exhausted and covered in blood, I sat outside the medical tent staring at the stars. Wilson joined me, handing over a bottle of water. "Mendoza's going to make it," he said quietly. "They're shipping him to Bagram tonight, then Germany. Jackson and Guzman too. Peterson will be back with his unit in a couple weeks." I nodded too, tired to speak. We had violated protocol by landing in a hot LZ without escort, potentially risking the aircraft and crew. But we had saved 4 lives that would have been lost had we followed the rule book. It was a calculation we had made dozens of times before, and would make dozens of times again, weighing the letter of regulations against the spirit of our mission. The next morning, we received word that the Marine platoon had successfully withdrawn from the village with no additional casualties. The battalion commander had adjusted his operational plans based on the fierce resistance encountered. Our actions, while technically outside approved protocols, received no official scrutiny. Results mattered more than procedures in the reality of combat. 3 days later, we rotated back to Camp Bastion for rest and refit. In my locker, I kept a small notebook with names, every casualty I had treated, their injuries, their status. When I last saw them, I added 4 more names to the list, then closed it away. There would be more names tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that. As Pararescuemen, we existed in the space between regulations and necessity, between protocols and survival. The motto etched on my rescue knife said it all. These things we do that others may live. Sometimes that meant following the rules. More often, it meant making impossible choices in impossible situations and finding a way forward when no clear path existed. In the end, it wasn't about rules of engagement or standard operating procedures. It was about the 19-year-old, kid from Ohio or Texas or wherever, who deserved every chance to make it home alive. That was the real mission, the only one that truly mattered. Staff Sergeant Nathan Collins, 28 years old, 2nd Battalion, 506th Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, born in Knoxville, Tennessee. The radio crackled with static as I tried again to reach battalion. High on the windswept ridge, our communications had been spotty at best. 15,000 feet above sea level, the thin air burned in my lungs as I keyed the handset once more. Badger 6, this is Reaper 2-1. We are in contact with enemy forces on the eastern slope. Request immediate fire support. Over. More static. Then, finally, a response so broken by interference, it was barely comprehensible. Reaper. 2-1, this is Badger 6. Say again your position. Your last transmission was garbled. Over. I suppressed a curse as I glanced at the GPS unit. Our position hadn't changed in the 6 hours since we'd seized this godforsaken ridge. The same ridge that headquarters had insisted was strategically vital terrain, despite being so remote that even our comms couldn't reach the valley below. Badger 6, Reaper 2-1. Grid coordinates unchanged. Enemy force estimated at 30-plus fighters moving up the eastern slope. We are engaging. Request immediate fire support or permission to withdraw to secondary position. Over. The Setichori reply came back fragmented. Maintain position. Reinforcements. Strategic value. 6 hours. 6 hours. In the dying light of the Afghan afternoon, with temperatures already plummeting toward freezing, my squad of 11 soldiers was facing a determined Taliban force at least 3 times our size. And Battalion wanted us to hold for 6 more hours. From his position at the northern edge of our perimeter, Specialist Ramirez fired a burst from his M240, the heavy machine gun roaring in the thin mountain air. A second later, RPG fire erupted from the rocks below, the distinctive whoosh followed by an explosion that showered our position with shrapnel and debris. I looked at my men, their faces gaunt from 3 days of operating above 14,000 feet. Their lips tinged blue from hypoxia despite the Diamox medication we'd all been taking. This was the disconnect that defined our war. Generals in air-conditioned headquarters moving pieces across digital maps while we fought and died. On nameless ridgelines that would be abandoned a month later. Dig in, I told them, checking the magazine in my M4. They're coming up the east face. Jackson, shift your team to reinforce that side. Martinez, set up the claymores along the approach. We hold until dark, then reassess. As my men moved to their positions, I wondered if anyone at headquarters truly understood what they were asking us to do, or if Ridge 457 was just another coordinate on a map, another objective to be seized in a war that had long since lost its meaning to those of us fighting it. The mission had begun 3 days earlier at Forward Operating Base Shank, in Logar Province. Our company had been conducting operations in the area for the past 4 months, focusing on disrupting Taliban movement through the high mountain passes that connected Logar to Pakistan's tribal areas. Most of our missions had been standard patrols and occasional raids on suspected insurgent hideouts. Nothing had prepared us for the operation we were about to undertake. Captain Hayes, our company commander, gathered the platoon leaders and squad leaders for a briefing. The operations center was cramped and smelled of stale coffee and too many unwashed bodies. Intelligence indicates the Taliban are using this high-altitude pass to move weapons and fighters, Hayes explained, pointing to a topographical map displaying a series of ridges and valleys. These supply lines are supporting operations throughout the province, Command wants us to interdict this route by establishing observation posts on these key terrain features. He indicated 3 ridge lines, each marked with a grid coordinate. The elevations were listed beside them: 14,300 feet, 15,100 feet, and 14,600 feet. There was an uncomfortable silence as we processed what we were seeing. "Sir," Lieutenant Parker said finally, "those positions are above 14,000 feet. That's extreme high-altitude terrain. We're not equipped or acclimatized for operations at that elevation." Captain Hayes nodded grimly. "I've already raised those concerns with Battalion. The response was that this is a strategic priority that can't wait for specialized mountain troops. We'll be issued supplemental cold weather gear and Diamox for altitude sickness. The mission timeline is 48 hours on position before relief." The room erupted in murmured conversations. Operating at those elevations required specialized training and equipment. The 101st Airborne was an elite light infantry unit, but we weren't mountain warfare specialists. The physical toll of fighting above 14,000 feet would be extreme, even before considering enemy contact. "Insertion will be by helicopter to the highest LZs possible," Hayes continued, "followed by foot movement to the observation points. Each squad will establish a defensive position and monitor the pass below. If you observe enemy movement, you are authorized to engage, but priority is on gathering intelligence." After the briefing, I gathered my squad. We had been together for most of the deployment, 11 men who had become closer than family through shared hardship. As I explained the mission, I could see the concern in their eyes. "This is some serious bullshit," Staff Sergeant Martinez said quietly. "Nobody fights at 15,000 feet. The air's so thin you can barely think straight, let alone engage the enemy." "Command says it's happening," I replied, sharing his concern but maintaining the professional demeanor expected of a squad leader. "So we make it happen. Double-check your cold weather gear, pack extra socks, extra ammunition. We'll go through altitude protocols tonight." The next morning, we were issued our Diamox medication and loaded onto CH-47 Chinooks. The massive helicopters struggled as we gained altitude, the pilots pushing the aircraft to their operational ceiling. Even with the doors open, the thin air made breathing difficult as we approached the drop-off point. We were deposited on a small plateau at approximately 13,000 feet, as high as the Chinooks could safely operate with a full load. From there, we began the grueling ascent to Ridge 457, our assigned observation point. The climb was brutal. Each step required tremendous effort as we navigated loose scree and jagged rocks. Our 70-pound packs felt twice as heavy in the thin air. Several soldiers developed severe headaches and nausea despite the medication. Early signs of acute mountain sickness. After 6 hours of climbing, we reached the ridge. The vista was breathtaking. Snow-capped peaks stretched to the horizon with deep valleys carved between them. In the clear mountain air, visibility extended. For miles, I could see why Command valued these positions for observation. What wasn't clear was how they expected us to defend them if discovered. We established our defensive perimeter, setting up observation posts and preparing fighting positions as best we could in the rocky terrain. The temperature dropped rapidly as the sun began to set, plunging well below freezing. Even with our cold weather gear, the biting wind cut through to the bone. "Reaper 2-1, this is Badger 6, the radio crackled as we completed our setup. "Sit rep, over. Badger 6, Reaper 2-1. We have reached Ridge 457 and established defensive positions. Visibility excellent. No enemy activity. Observed. Be advised, 2 men showing signs of AMS. Request status of adjacent units, over. Reaper 2-1. Adjacent units are in position on Ridges 455 and 456. Maintain communication protocols and regular reports. Badger 6 out." That first night was one of the most miserable of my life. The temperature dropped to -15 Celsius. The oxygen saturation in our blood decreased further as we slept, leading to periodic breathing and a sense of suffocation that jolted us awake, gasping for air. By morning, 4 of my 11 men were showing moderate to severe symptoms of altitude sickness. "We need to get Hernandez and Wilson to lower elevation," Martinez told me as we assessed the situation. "Their oxygen levels are below 70%. They're getting confused and showing signs of pulmonary edema." I radioed Battalion with the situation. expecting an immediate evacuation order. Instead, I received instructions to continue the mission with the remaining effective personnel. "Sir, I have men who could die from HAPE if not evacuated," I argued. "Understood, Reaper 2-1, came the reply. "But the mission parameters require maintaining observation on that pass. Intelligence indicates high-value targets may be moving through within the next 24 to 48 hours. Medevac is not authorized at this time unless soldiers are critical." Out. The disconnect was staggering. Someone at division or higher had decided that watching this mountain pass was worth the potential death of American soldiers from environmental conditions before even considering enemy action. I made the decision to send Hernandez and Wilson down with our medic, reducing our effective strength to 8. On the second day, we observed our first enemy movement, a small group of 4 fighters moving through the pass below. We reported the sighting but were instructed not to engage unless directly threatened. The fighters passed without incident, unaware of our position high above them. That afternoon, our luck changed. A Taliban spotter, likely from a local village, must have observed the Chinook drop-offs. A larger group began moving up the slope toward our position, using the terrain for cover as they ascended. "Contact imminent," I reported to battalion. "Enemy force approaching Ridge 457 from the east. Estimate 20-plus fighters. Maintain position and engage only if necessary," came the response. "Air support is tasked, but weather conditions may prevent deployment." The reality of our situation hit home. We were 8 soldiers, some suffering from altitude sickness, facing a superior enemy force on terrain that negated most of our technological advantages. Our air support was questionable due to the same high-altitude conditions that were sapping our strength, and our orders were to hold a position that had no inherent value beyond the arbitrary designation on someone's strategic map. When the attack came, it was from multiple directions at once. The Taliban had used the broken terrain to maneuver around our flanks, attempting to encircle our position. Our first warning was the distinctive crack of AK-47 fire from the southern approach. "Contact right!" shouted Jackson, returning fire with his M4. Almost simultaneously, RPG fire erupted from the eastern slope, exploding against the rocks near our northern observation post. Ramirez immediately engaged with the M240, the heavy machine gun providing crucial suppressive fire that momentarily halted the eastern advance. The firefight intensified as more Taliban fighters joined the assault. I moved between positions, directing fire and attempting to maintain communication with battalion. The thin air made every movement exhausting. Even the simple act of reloading a magazine left me gasping for breath. "Badger 6, this is Reaper 2-1. We are surrounded and taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Request immediate fire support or extraction. Over." The response was delayed and broken by static, but the message was clear enough. "Hold position. Reinforcements coming in 6 hours." It might as well have been 6 days. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ridge, I gathered my remaining team leaders for a hasty council. "We can't hold this position through the night," Martinez stated flatly. "We're low on ammo. Peterson took shrapnel in that last RPG attack, and they'll keep bringing up more fighters." Jackson nodded in agreement. "The eastern slope is too exposed. If they push hard from that direction after dark, we won't have the firepower to stop them." I made the hardest decision of my career. We're pulling back to the secondary position at 13,800 feet. Better defensive terrain, shorter supply line if they do get reinforcements to us. "Battalion won't like it," Martinez cautioned. "Battalion isn't up here," I replied. "We'll set up a fighting withdrawal. Jackson, take point with your team. Martinez, your rear guard with the M240. We move in 15 minutes after I set the claymores to cover our retreat." We executed the withdrawal as night fell, moving carefully down the western slope to a more defensible position we had identified during our ascent. The Taliban fighters, likely also suffering from the elevation, did not immediately pursue. We established a new perimeter, treating Peterson's wounds as best we could with our limited medical supplies. The radio call from battalion came exactly as I expected. "Reaper 2-1, report position. You have abandoned your assigned observation post. Return immediately. Over." "Badger 6, this is Reaper 2-1. We have relocated to grid Charlie Oscar 479er342 due to overwhelming enemy force and casualties. We have better defensive position and maintain observation capability. Request immediate support. Over. The argument that followed was predictably one-sided, with threats of disciplinary action and demands to retake the ridge. What finally silenced Battalion was the sound of renewed gunfire as the Taliban fighters located our new position and began probing attacks. "Taking enemy fire," I shouted into the radio. "We'll attempt to hold current position. Reaper 2-1 out." The night passed in a series of sporadic engagements, with the Taliban unwilling to mount a full assault on our new, more defensible location. When dawn broke, bringing temperatures that felt almost warm after the nighttime freeze, we spotted the welcome sight of Apache attack helicopters circling the valley below. Within an hour, a quick reaction force reached our position, allowing us to evacuate our wounded and withdraw completely from the high ridges. The official after-action report described the operation as partially successful in disrupting enemy movement. Ridge 457 was abandoned within 2 weeks when it became clear that maintaining observation posts at that elevation was unsustainable. 3 months later, I sat in another briefing, listening to another captain explain another operation, to seize and hold another meaningless piece of terrain. The maps were different, the grid coordinates had changed, but the fundamental disconnect remained between those who planned the war from air-conditioned rooms and those who fought it, in thin mountain air where each breath was a struggle and each step could be your last. "Any questions?" the captain asked after outlining the mission parameters. I had many, but only one that mattered. How many more nameless ridges would we fight and die for, only to abandon them when the strategic winds shifted? But that wasn't a question a staff sergeant could ask. So instead, I simply said, "No questions, sir. We'll make it happen." Because that's what soldiers do, even when the mission makes no sense at all. Sergeant David Mercer, 25 years old, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, Fox Company, born in Columbus, Ohio. The sound of breaking glass shattered the pre-dawn silence. A Marine demolition team had just breached the front entrance of a suspected Taliban stronghold. I pressed my back against the mud brick wall beside the doorway, my M4 at the ready, sweat already soaking through my combat shirt despite the cool morning air. Beside me, Lance Corporal Wilson tensed, his eyes focused on the dark doorway, waiting for the signal to move. "2, set!" came the call from inside, indicating the first fire team had secured the immediate entry point. "Go, go, go!" I shouted, turning the corner and entering the building, my rifle up and scanning for threats. Wilson followed close behind, moving left while I went right, our sectors of fire overlapping in practiced precision. The interior was dark, the air thick with dust from the breaching charge. Thin beams of sunlight pierced through small windows, illuminating floating particles and diagonal shafts. The distinctive smell of an Afghan home, a mixture of cooking oil, wood smoke, and unwashed bodies, filled my nostrils. "Clear right," I called, checking a small alcove. "Clear left," Wilson responded. We advanced deeper into the structure, each room requiring the same methodical clearance procedure, each doorway a potential death trap, each shadow a possible hiding place for an enemy fighter. This was our 9th house of the morning, and we were only a quarter of the way through the Sangin market district, a maze of interconnected compounds and narrow alleyways that had been a Taliban stronghold for years. Outside, I could hear the rumble of an MRAP vehicle moving into position to support our advance. Somewhere nearby, the distinctive crackle of an M240 machine gun engaged a target, the gunner's voice audible over the radio as he reported the effects. "Target destroyed. Multiple enemy down southeast corner of the market." I keyed my radio. "Roger that, Echo 2 actual. Be advised we're clearing building marked 9 or 3 on your overlay. No contact yet." As we reached the courtyard at the center of the compound, I noticed fresh bloodstains on the packed earth. Boot prints led toward a back door I hadn't been briefed on. Wilson saw it too, nodding toward the door without speaking. We had been in Afghanistan long enough to read the signs. The Taliban had been here, perhaps only hours before, and they had left in a hurry, carrying wounded. This was the reality of urban combat in Afghanistan's contested villages. Not the dramatic door-kicking portrayed in movies, but a slow, exhausting process of clearing mud structures room by room under the constant threat of IEDs, ambushes, and booby traps. Yet somewhere in this labyrinthine market district was high value. Target Abdullah Masood, a local Taliban commander responsible for dozens of attacks on coalition forces. And we had been tasked with finding him, or what remained of his network. I motioned to Wilson to cover me as I approached the back door. Fox 2-1 to all elements. We have signs of recent enemy presence and possible wounded being moved. Through the market area. Proceeding with clearance. Out. We had arrived in Sangin district, Helmand province, 6 weeks earlier, as part of a surge operation to retake areas that had fallen under Taliban control. The British forces previously responsible for the area had suffered heavy casualties trying to hold this strategic crossroads town. And now the Marines of 2-8 had been tasked with clearing it once and for all. Our first impression of Sangin came during the helicopter insertion at a landing zone 5 kilometers outside town. Even before we had boots on the ground, our CH-53s took fire from multiple positions. Unlike many parts of Afghanistan where the Taliban preferred hit-and-run tactics, in Sangin, they stood and fought. Welcome to Sangin, our company commander, Captain Reynolds, told us during the initial briefing at Forward Operating Base Jackson. British forces recorded more casualties here than anywhere else in Afghanistan. The Taliban consider this their territory and will defend it aggressively. He pointed to a map showing the town center. The market district is their command and control hub. It's a warren of compounds connected by alleyways too narrow for vehicles. Some passages run between and under buildings. The Taliban have had years to prepare their defenses, including extensive IED belts on all approach routes. The plan called for a methodical clearance operation, compound by compound, with strict protocols to minimize civilian casualties while rooting out Taliban fighters embedded in the population. Intelligence had identified several high-value targets operating in the area, including Abdullah Masood, a mid-level commander responsible for coordinating IED cells throughout northern Helmand. This isn't going to be quick or easy, Captain, Reynolds concluded. We're talking weeks, not days, to properly clear and hold this area. The key is to separate the Taliban from the population. Once the civilians see we're staying, they'll be more willing to cooperate. Our first patrols into Sangin's outskirts confirmed everything we'd been told. The town was effectively empty of civilians in many areas, with those remaining showing clear signs of intimidation. Every route showed evidence of IED activity, disturbed earth, suspicious wire, freshly placed rocks marking potential trigger points. We lost our first Marine 3 days in. Lance Corporal Jenkins stepped on a pressure plate hidden under a pile of trash, losing both legs in the explosion. The corpsman worked frantically to apply tourniquets while we established a security perimeter and called for emergency evacuation. Jenkins survived, but he was the first of many casualties our battalion would sustain in Sangin. The Taliban's tactics were sophisticated and adaptive. They used children as spotters, reporting our movements via simple hand signals or cell phones. Fighting positions had been prepared with interlocking fields of fire, and escape routes allowed their fighters to withdraw when faced with superior firepower, only to reappear elsewhere. After 2 weeks of clearing the town's periphery, we pushed toward the central market district, the heart of Taliban resistance. Our platoon was tasked with clearing the southeastern quadrant, a particularly dense cluster of compounds surrounding the old marketplace. The night before our push into the market, Staff Sergeant Martinez gathered our squad. Listen up. Intel says Masood himself might be in the area. Drone footage shows increased activity in these compounds. He pointed to several buildings on a satellite image. We're going to clear this entire sector, building by building. First squad will push from the northeast, second squad from the southwest. We'll squeeze anything in between. Wilson raised his hand. What about civilians, Staff Sergeant? Most have cleared out after the leaflet drops, but expect some to remain. Standard ROE applies. Positive identification before engaging. Any military-age males need to be documented and searched. We're looking for fighters' calluses, powder residue, the usual indicators. At Aero 415 the next morning, we moved into position, under cover of darkness. The distant thump of artillery announced the operation's commencement as illumination rounds bathed the town in ghostly light. Our supporting tanks and MRAPs established blocking positions on the main roads, while our squads prepared to enter the maze of alleyways too narrow for vehicles. The first building we cleared was empty, as were the second and third. The fourth contained an elderly couple who refused to leave despite the fighting. Through our interpreter, they insisted they had nowhere else to go. After checking their identification and searching the premises, we marked the building as cleared and continued our advance. The fifth building showed the first signs of enemy presence: fresh food, multiple sets of men's footwear, and a cache of ammunition hidden under floorboards. We called in EOD to handle the munitions and continued clearing the sector. By mid-morning, we had cleared 8 structures and were approaching a large compound that intelligence had flagged as a possible Taliban meeting location. That's when we encountered our first resistance of the day. As our demolition team prepared to breach the front entrance, a single shot rang out from a window above, striking Private First Class Rodriguez in the shoulder. He dropped, crying out in pain but conscious. "Contact front," I shouted, pulling Rodriguez behind a nearby wall as Wilson and Lance Corporal Thomas returned fire. Our squad automatic weapon opened up, suppressing the window position as we assessed Rodriguez's wound. Through and through, upper shoulder, our corpsman reported, quickly applying a pressure dressing. "He'll live, but he needs evac." While coordinating Rodriguez's evacuation, we developed a new plan to clear the building. Instead of a frontal assault, we called in engineering support to breach through a sidewall, creating an entry point the defenders weren't covering. The combat engineers arrived with a Bobcat-mounted breaching tool, punching through the mud brick wall with surprising efficiency. As dust and debris filled the air, we tossed flashbang grenades through the breach and followed immediately behind. Inside, we engaged 2 Taliban fighters who had been caught off guard by our alternate entry. Both went down in the initial burst of fire. A third fighter attempted to flee up a staircase but was cut down by Thomas's well-aimed shots. The remaining rooms were clear, but evidence suggested more fighters had fled through a tunnel system that connected to adjacent buildings. Fox 2-1 to command. Be advised we have a tunnel network in the market area. Appears to connect multiple structures. Requesting K9 support for tunnel clearance, over. Copy Fox 2-1. K9 assets are committed elsewhere. Continue with building clearance. Be advised, drone footage shows movement 2 buildings north of your position. Multiple heat signatures converging. We secured our cleared building and prepared to move toward the new target area. The tunnel entrances were marked for later exploration by specialized teams. As we exited into the narrow alleyway, the distinctive crack of AK fire forced us back into cover. "Taking fire from the north," Wilson shouted, returning fire from behind a low wall. The radio crackled with reports of contact from other Marine units throughout the market district. The Taliban were mounting a coordinated defense, using their intimate knowledge of the terrain to maximum advantage. Fox 2-1, this is Eagle 6. You are cleared for danger close fire mission. Target building at your 2 o'clock. Grid square 549er362. Mark your position with smoke. Over. I tossed a green smoke grenade into the clearing between our position and the target building. Smoke out. Danger close. All. Units get small. Moments later, 2 155 mm artillery rounds impacted the target building, collapsing its eastern wall in a cloud of dust and debris. We used the confusion to advance, clearing the next 2 compounds with methodical precision. Late afternoon, we had cleared 14 buildings and engaged enemy fighters in 4 separate locations. Our casualties remained light, Rodriguez being the only injury requiring evacuation. Intelligence gathered from captured materials indicated we had disrupted a significant Taliban cell, though Masood himself remained elusive. As darkness approached, we established defensive positions in cleared buildings, setting up overlapping fields of fire and preparing for the inevitable counterattacks that came with nightfall in Sangin. The temperature dropped rapidly, and I distributed extra batteries for night vision equipment and radios. "You think Masood was here?" Wilson asked as we shared a meal of MREs in our defensive position. "He was here," I replied, thinking of the evidence we'd found, the sophisticated communications equipment, the tunnel network, the coordinated defense. "But he's not stupid. He probably left as soon as our operation began." Then what's the point? We clear these buildings, and as soon as we leave, they come right back. It was a question every Marine in Afghanistan had asked themselves at some point. The cycle seemed endless. Clear an area, hold it briefly, then watch the Taliban filter back in when we move to the next hotspot. The point is we're here now, I told him, not entirely believing it myself, and while we're here they can't operate freely. Wilson nodded, though his expression suggested he remained unconvinced. We both knew the reality. This was a war of patience, and the Taliban had demonstrated they could wait us out. The radio interrupted our conversation. All units, this is command. Be advised, ICOM chatter indicates enemy forces are regrouping at the northern edge of the market. Expect probing attacks throughout the night. Maintain vigilance and report all activity. We rotated sleep schedules through the night with 2 Marines always on watch. As predicted, the Taliban launched several probing attacks, testing our positions without committing to a full assault. Illumination rounds cast strange shadows across the market district, creating a surreal landscape of half-destroyed buildings and abandoned stalls. Morning brought the continuation of our clearance operation. 9 more buildings, 3 more firefights, 1 more casualty. Lance Corporal Davis caught shrapnel from an RPG that exploded near his position. Like Rodriguez, he would survive his wounds, but his war in Afghanistan was over. By the operation's 3rd day, we had cleared the entire southeast quadrant of the market. Other Marine units reported similar progress, though at a cost. 2 Marines, killed and 11 wounded across the battalion. We had killed an estimated 25 Taliban fighters and captured 7 others, along with significant weapons caches and intelligence materials. Captain Reynolds gathered the platoon leaders and squad leaders for a briefing at our temporary command post in a cleared school building. Good work so far, Marines. Intel indicates we've disrupted their command structure significantly, though Mehsud himself appears to have escaped to Pakistan before our operation began. He pointed to the map showing our progress. We'll continue, holding the market district while Afghan National Army forces establish permanent checkpoints. Our next phase begins tomorrow, pushing north toward the river crossing. Later that night, as I conducted a final check on our defensive positions, I stood on the roof of our building, looking out over the market district. Illumination rounds still floated down on parachutes, casting their ghostly light over the shattered landscape. In the distance, sporadic gunfire reminded us that the Taliban, though diminished, remained a presence. This was the reality of our war in Afghanistan's towns and villages, an endless succession of cleared rooms, controlled detonations, sporadic firefights and tenuous gains that could disappear overnight. We weren't fighting for territory in the traditional sense, but for influence over a population caught between our promises of security and the Taliban's promises of vengeance against collaborators. Tomorrow would bring more house-to-house fighting, more rooms to clear, more alleyways to navigate under the constant threat of snipers and IEDs. Some of us wouldn't make it through the coming days. Others would carry the physical and psychological wounds for decades. All of us would remember the sights, sounds, and smells of Sangin's market district, a place most Americans couldn't find on a map, but that would forever be etched in our memories. As I descended from the rooftop to check on my Marines, I found Wilson cleaning his rifle, a ritual that provided comfort through familiarity. Get some sleep, I told him. I've got first watch. He nodded, setting his weapon aside. Hey, Sarge, that building today, the one with the tunnel, you think that was Mehsud's command post? Probably, I replied. Why? Wilson shrugged. Just wondering if any of this makes a difference in the big picture. We clear one block, they move to the next. We leave, they come back. I had no satisfying answer, so I gave him the only truth I knew. Our job isn't the big picture. Our job is to clear the next room, the next building, the next block. Keep each other alive. Everything beyond that is above our pay grade. He seemed to accept this, lying back on his sleeping mat. Within minutes, he was asleep, a skill all combat veterans develop, the ability to find rest in the brief intervals between danger. I took my position at the window, scanning the darkened streets, below through my night vision. Somewhere out there, the Taliban were watching, waiting, planning their next move, and tomorrow, we would resume our methodical clearance, one room at a time, in the endless chess match that defined urban combat in Afghanistan's contested towns. This was Sangin, a place where progress was measured in cleared rooms and survival was calculated in hours. Not the war America had envisioned after September 11th, but the war we had found, house by house, room by room, day after uncertain day. Sergeant James Hadley, 32 years old, 22nd Special Air Service Regiment, Counter IED Task Force, born in Newcastle, England. The hand-drawn map trembled in my gloved fingers as I studied the crude pencil marks. The young Afghan boy who'd brought it to our base stood nervously between two of our interpreters, his eyes darting around the Tactical Operations Center. According to him, the Taliban had planted a massive IED beneath the road leading to the girls' school our unit had helped reopen last month. The device was supposedly powerful enough to destroy any vehicle that passed over it, including the school buses scheduled to resume service the next morning. The boy says there are 3 wires, our lead interpreter explained. His father was forced to help dig the hole for the device. He sent his son to warn us. I studied the child, no more than 10 years old, with dirt-caked fingernails and fear in his eyes. In this war, even children were forced to choose sides. If the Taliban discovered he had informed us, his entire family would likely be killed. If we failed to act on his information, dozens of schoolgirls might die instead. There were no clean choices in this war, no clear moral high ground, only varying shades of compromise and consequence. "Tell the boy we'll help," I said, folding the map. "And tell him to bring his family to the base tonight. We'll need to relocate them regardless of what we find." Captain Atkins nodded in agreement, already on the radio coordinating with our infantry support element. As the regiment's senior EOD specialist attached to the SAS task force, these decisions ultimately fell to me. The moral calculus had become routine, weighing risks, evaluating intelligence, making life or death choices based on limited information from sources with complex motives. I gathered my team while studying the map more carefully. The alleged IED location was in a notorious part of Ghazni province, where we'd lost 3 vehicles in the past month alone. The area was a Taliban stronghold, with numerous compounds offering overwatch of the road. If this was legitimate intelligence, we'd be saving dozens of lives. If it was a trap, we'd be walking into an ambush. "Suit up," I told Corporal Mitchell, my number 2. "We're leaving in 15 minutes. As I donned my protective gear, significantly lighter than standard EOD suits to allow for the mobility our operations required, I tried not to think about my previous rotation to Helmand, where I'd watched my best friend disappear in a cloud of dust and shrapnel after trusting similar intelligence. This war had taught me that good intentions paved the road to hell just as effectively as malice. And in Afghanistan, that road was invariably seeded with improvised explosive devices. The moral certainty I'd arrived with 3 deployments ago had long since eroded, replaced by a pragmatic calculus of minimizing harm. We would check the boy's information because failing to do so risked civilian lives. But we would approach every aspect of the mission with the skepticism born of bitter experience. Trust, but verify, and always expect the worst. I had been in Afghanistan for 4 months on my 3rd deployment, serving with the specialized counter-IED task force attached to the SAS. My previous 2 tours had been with conventional Royal Engineers, clearing routes in Helmand province. After showing aptitude for the high-pressure work and receiving advanced training, I had been selected for this joint special operations task force, targeting the bomb makers and their networks, rather than just the devices themselves. Our unit operated throughout eastern Afghanistan, focusing on high-threat areas where conventional EOD teams faced excessive risk. We combined the technical expertise of bomb disposal with the tactical capabilities of special forces, allowing us to operate in non-permissive environments with minimal support. Ghazni province had become our primary area of operations over the previous 6 weeks. Intelligence indicated that a sophisticated bomb-making cell had established itself there, introducing new IED designs that had proven particularly deadly. Our mission was twofold: neutralize the devices, and collect forensic evidence that might lead us to the bomb makers themselves. The vehicle convoy departed our forward operating base at 2130 hours under cover of darkness. We traveled in modified Land Rovers and Jackals, lighter and faster than the heavily armored MRAPs used by conventional forces, sacrificing some protection for mobility and a lower profile. Captain Atkins commanded the operation, with 8 SAS operators providing security and my 2-man EOD team focused on the technical aspects. Remember, we treat this as a potential setup until proven otherwise. Atkins reminded everyone over the radio as we approached the target area. Hadley, your team doesn't move forward until we've secured the immediate area and checked for secondary devices or observation posts. Understood, I replied, checking my equipment one last time. We stopped approximately 400 meters from the suspected IED location, continuing on foot to minimize our signature. The night vision bathed the landscape in an eerie green glow as we advanced cautiously, scanning for the tripwires, pressure plates, and other triggering devices that had claimed so many lives throughout the conflict. The road itself was unpaved, a dirt track wide enough for a single vehicle, with drainage ditches on either side. According to the boys' map, the IED had been placed near a culvert where the road narrowed slightly, forcing vehicles to pass directly over the buried device. Set up a perimeter, 200 meters in all directions, Atkins ordered as we reached the general area. I want eyes on every approach, every building. If anyone moves out there, I want to know about it. The SAS operators moved with practiced efficiency, establishing overwatch positions while conducting a sweep for potential triggermen or spotters. Meanwhile, Mitchell and I began our preliminary assessment, using specialized ground-penetrating radar to scan the road without disturbing the surface. I've got something, Mitchell murmured after several minutes. Approximately 2 meters left of the culvert, buried about 40 centimeters deep. Density consistent with a main charge. I moved to his position, examining the readout. Size? Large. 20, maybe 25 kilos of homemade explosive at a guess. That was enough to destroy any vehicle that passed over it and kill everyone inside. If the school buses used this route as planned, the casualties would be catastrophic. Captain, we have confirmation, I reported via radio. Device is present at the location indicated by the source. Proceeding with render-safe procedures. Copy that. Area is secure for now, but make it quick. I don't like our exposure here. Traditional EOD protocol would involve careful excavation and manual disarmament of the device, the safest approach for preserving evidence and minimizing collateral damage. However, our operational requirements often necessitated shortcuts that would be considered heresy in conventional EOD circles. Time check, I asked Mitchell. 22 minutes on site so far. Dawn in approximately 3 hours. I made a decision based on the tactical situation. We're going with remote disruption. The forensics aren't worth the risk of a prolonged operation in this area. Mitchell nodded, already unpacking the disruptor, a specialized tool that would fire a high-pressure water jet to separate the IED's power source from its detonator without triggering the main charge. It wasn't elegant, and it would destroy much of the evidence we might otherwise collect, but it prioritized the safety of our team in a hostile environment. As Mitchell set up the equipment, I conducted a more detailed scan of the surrounding area, looking for secondary devices or anti-personnel mines that might target EOD technicians, a common Taliban tactic. The road appeared clear, but something about the situation continued to bother me. This is too easy, I muttered to myself, surveying the empty compounds nearby. Where's the security? They leave a device this size unattended? Mitchell glanced up from his work. Maybe our source's information forced them to withdraw temporarily. Maybe, I conceded, though my instinct suggested otherwise. 3 deployments had taught me that apparent good fortune often masked deeper dangers. With the disruptor in position, we withdrew to a safe distance and prepared for detonation. Fire in the hole, I announced over the radio, ensuring all personnel were under cover. Mitchell triggered the device, resulting in a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. We waited several minutes before approaching to assess the results. The disruptor had functioned as intended, separating the power source from the firing chain. Now we could examine what remained of the device more safely. "I need to check the main charge," I told Mitchell, moving forward with a portable X-ray system to examine the disrupted IED. What I found confirmed my unease. The device was indeed large and professionally constructed, but it lacked certain refinements I'd come to associate with the Ghazni bomb-making cell. The wiring was cruder, the explosive mix different. This wasn't their work. "Something's not right," I reported to Atkins. "This device doesn't match the signature of our target cell. It's almost like..." My words were cut short by urgent radio traffic. "Contact west. Multiple armed individuals approaching from compounds at our 7 o'clock. Gunfire erupted almost immediately, the distinctive crack of AK-47s followed by the sharper reports of our team's weapons. We had walked into exactly the scenario I had feared. The IED was genuine, but it had also served as bait for an ambush. "Fall back to the vehicles," Atkins ordered. "Controlled withdrawal buddy teams." Mitchell and I gathered our essential equipment, abandoning the rest. The firefight intensified as Taliban fighters emerged from multiple compounds, attempting to cut off our escape route. The SAS operators responded with precise, disciplined fire, covering our movement as we retreated toward the vehicles. "RPG," someone shouted, followed by an explosion that showered us with dirt and debris. We reached the vehicles under heavy fire, piling in as the drivers started engines. One of our Jackals provided covering fire with its mounted heavy machine gun, suppressing the enemy positions long enough for us to begin our extraction. As we sped away from the ambush site, I radioed for air support. Within minutes, an Apache attack helicopter appeared overhead, engaging the Taliban positions with 30mm cannon fire and forcing them to seek cover. The journey back to base was tense but uneventful. Dawn was breaking as we passed through the gates, the adrenaline of combat gradually giving way to the crushing fatigue that followed such operations. During the debriefing, we pieced together what had happened. The boy's information had been partially accurate. There was indeed an IED where he had indicated, but the circumstances suggested a more complex situation than we had initially assumed. "The family never showed up at the base," Captain Atkins informed us. "Our interpreters went to their village, but the house was empty. So the boy was coerced," I suggested. "The Taliban forced him to bring us the information, knowing we'd act on it." "Possibly. Or his father was working with them willingly, and they evacuated the family before the ambush." The moral implications were troubling. Had we been manipulated into endangering ourselves by exploiting our concern for civilian casualties? Had the family been threatened, or were they willing participants? There was no way to know for certain. "At least we neutralized a device that could have killed school children," Mitchell offered. "Unless that was never the plan," I countered. "It could have been placed specifically to target us." This was the moral quagmire of counterinsurgency warfare, never knowing with certainty who was friend or foe, never able to fully trust even those who appeared to be helping. Every action carried potential consequences that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. 2 days later, intelligence reported that the family had been spotted crossing into Pakistan, alive and apparently unharmed. This suggested their cooperation with the Taliban might have been voluntary, though even this wasn't conclusive. The line between willing participant and coerced victim was often blurred in a conflict where survival frequently depended on accommodating. "Whichever armed group controlled your village that week, we did our job," Captain Atkins told me as we prepared for our next operation. "The device is neutralized, the school buses are running, and we all made it back. Focus on that." He wasn't wrong, but the experience reinforced the moral ambiguity that characterized everything we did in Afghanistan. Even our successes carried shadows of doubt and unintended consequences. The device we had neutralized wouldn't kill schoolgirls, but our presence continued to place local civilians in the crossfire of a conflict that offered no clear path to resolution. A week later, we received intelligence about another bomb maker's compound in a different part of Ghazni. The cycle would begin again: planning, risk assessment, execution, all while navigating the same murky ethical terrain. We would act because action was our purpose, because the alternative meant surrendering to the paralysis of moral uncertainty. As I prepared my equipment for the new mission, I thought about the young boy who had brought us the map. Had he been a victim or an accomplice? Would his life be better or worse for having encountered us? These questions had no satisfying answers, only the uncomfortable truth that in this war, even helping those in need came with unpredictable consequences. The long walk, EOD slang for approaching a suspected IED, had always been physically dangerous. But in Afghanistan, the most treacherous terrain wasn't the bomb-laden roads, but the moral landscape we traversed with each decision, each operation, each interaction with the local population. There was no protective suit for that journey, no technology to detect the hidden ethical mines, no disruption technique to render safe the consequences of our choices. And yet, we continued to walk that path, one careful step at a time, because the alternative was unthinkable. If we couldn't achieve unambiguous good in this complex conflict, we could at least strive to prevent the worst outcomes, clearing the IEDs one by one, protecting whatever innocence remained in a country where even children were forced to choose sides in a war they didn't create. Tomorrow would bring another device, another village, another moral calculation with lives in the balance. And we would face it, as we had faced everything in this conflict, with skill and courage, yes, but also with the humility to recognize that in the shadow war of counterinsurgency, even our best intentions carried no guarantee of righteousness. Hauptfeldwebel Thomas Weber, 34 years old, 2nd Company, Kommando Spezialkräfte, born in Munich, Germany. The Black Hornet nanodrone hovered silently outside the compound window, its tiny camera capturing high-resolution footage of the men inside. On my tablet screen, I could clearly identify 4 individuals, including our primary target, Abdul Rashid, a key Taliban facilitator responsible for coordinating attacks against German forces in Kunduz province. The drone, no larger than a hummingbird, was virtually undetectable as it transmitted real-time video to our observation post 200 meters away. Confirm visual on objective Falcon, I whispered into my radio, using our code name for Rashid. 4 individuals present, armed with AKs and 1 RPG visible in the northeast corner of the main room. Verstanden. Maintain surveillance, came the response from Hauptmann Bauer, our team leader. Predator will be on station in 12 minutes for full compound thermal imaging. I adjusted the drone's position slightly with the miniaturized controller, careful to keep it away from direct sight lines through the window. The technological marvel in my hands represented the cutting edge of NATO reconnaissance capabilities. German special forces equipped with American-designed micro-drones, conducting surveillance for a potential joint operation. A decade earlier, this level of intelligence gathering would have required a team physically infiltrating the compound at tremendous risk. Yet something felt wrong. Though the thermal signature showed only 4 individuals, the intelligence provided by our Afghan sources had indicated that Rashid never traveled with fewer than 8 bodyguards. Either our human intelligence was flawed, or there were other fighters nearby that even our advanced sensors couldn't detect. Schneider, check with the human team again, I instructed our intelligence specialist. Ask specifically about underground rooms or tunnels connected to the main compound. As impressive as our technical capabilities had become, they remained tools rather than solutions. In Afghanistan's complex human terrain, technology alone was never enough. The most sophisticated drones and sensors in NATO's arsenal could be defeated by a farmer with a shovel digging a tunnel, or by a local informant providing deliberately misleading information. Our greatest challenge wasn't gathering data, it was understanding its meaning and limitations in a battlefield, where truth itself was often the first casualty. Movement at the rear entrance, reported Feldwebel Müller from his observation position. 2 motorcycles approaching from the north, 4 individuals heavily armed. I shifted the nano-drone to observe this new development, the technological and human elements of our mission, converging toward what might soon become a direct confrontation. For all our advanced capabilities, this war would ultimately be decided by human beings making decisions based on imperfect information, both theirs and ours. Our mission to northern Afghanistan had begun 3 weeks earlier. The KSK's deployment was part of Germany's contribution to NATO operations, though our exact activities remained classified even within German military circles. Officially, we were military advisors supporting the Afghan National Army. Unofficially, we conducted high-risk reconnaissance and direct action missions against high-value Taliban targets, particularly those threatening German reconstruction efforts in Kunduz province. The briefing at our forward operating base had been clinical and precise, characteristic of German military planning. Hauptmann Bauer outlined our primary objective: locate and identify Abdul Rashid, a Taliban facilitator who had orchestrated several devastating attacks against German forces, including an IED that had killed 3 soldiers from the conventional Bundeswehr contingent 2 months earlier. Intelligence suggests Rashid is planning another major attack, Bauer explained, gesturing to the map displaying Kunduz province, likely targeting the provincial reconstruction team headquarters or the main supply route. Our mission is reconnaissance only. Identify, locate, and track Rashid so that a capture operation can be planned. What made this mission unique was our equipment allocation. In addition to standard reconnaissance gear, we had been assigned an experimental package of surveillance technology. Black Hornet nano drones, recently acquired from our American allies, advanced IMSI catchers for intercepting cell phone communications, and a direct link to Predator drone coverage when available. We're testing these integrated systems under field conditions, explained the technical specialist who had accompanied the equipment. The goal is seamless fusion of multiple intelligence streams, visual, electronic, and human, to create a comprehensive operational picture. Our 6-man team departed the following night, infiltrating the rural district where Rashid allegedly maintained a safe house. We established our observation post in an abandoned farmhouse with good sight lines to the suspected location, setting up our technical equipment with practiced efficiency. Remember, this is a technical reconnaissance mission, Bauer reminded us as we prepared for our first day of surveillance. We observe and report. If Rashid is confirmed, a separate task force will handle the capture operation. The technology performed impressively from the start. Our IMSI catcher intercepted cellular communications that, when translated by our interpreter, confirmed Taliban presence in the target area. The nanodrones provided detailed imagery of multiple compounds without exposing our personnel to detection. When combined with periodic Predator coverage from higher altitudes, we could track individual movements across a substantial area. Yet the human element proved more challenging. Our Afghan sources provided information that often contradicted the technical intelligence we gathered. One trusted informant insisted Rashid was using a different compound than the one where our electronic surveillance detected the highest level of Taliban communications. Another claimed Rashid had already left the area, despite thermal imagery showing consistent occupation patterns in our primary target location. This is why we need both, Feldwebel Schneider noted during our 3rd day of observation. A former intelligence analyst before joining KSK, he had a deeper understanding of the interplay between technical and human intelligence than most of us. The technology shows us what is happening now. The human sources tell us why it's happening and what might happen next. On the 5th day, our patience was rewarded when facial recognition software matched a man entering our primary target compound with Rashid's profile. The software, running on a ruggedized laptop, compared the nano drone footage against a database of known Taliban figures, highlighting the match with a red box and a confidence percentage of 87%. Target confirmed, I reported to Bauer, who immediately contacted headquarters to update mission status. The response was immediate. The capture operation was authorized for the following night, with our team providing real-time intelligence and perimeter security. Additional KSK operators would conduct the actual entry and apprehension, supported by American helicopters for quick extraction. We intensified our surveillance, deploying all 4 nanodrones to monitor different aspects of the compound simultaneously. The level of detail was remarkable. We could count weapons, identify individuals, even observe what they were eating. The technology created an illusion of omniscience, as if no secret could remain hidden from our electronic gaze. That illusion was shattered the following morning, when one of our human sources arrived at a predetermined meeting point with critical information. Rashid had a tunnel system connecting 3 different compounds, allowing him to move undetected between locations. Our comprehensive technical surveillance had completely missed this vital detail. The tunnels were built years ago during the Soviet occupation, explained Schneider, after debriefing the source. They've been maintained and expanded. According to our source, Rashid can move between the main compound and 2 auxiliary locations without ever appearing in the open. This information fundamentally altered our operational picture. What we had believed to be separate groups of Taliban fighters might actually be the same individuals moving underground between positions. Our careful surveillance of entry and exit points had been monitoring only a fraction of the actual movement. Bauer immediately requested additional technical assets, ground-penetrating radar to verify the tunnel system, and more comprehensive thermal coverage. But these would take time to arrive, and our operation was scheduled for that night. We proceed with what we have, he decided after consulting with headquarters. But we adjust the plan to account for possible underground movement. The assault team needs to secure all 3 compounds simultaneously. As the assault time approached, we deployed our technical assets to provide maximum coverage. 2 nano-drones monitored the main compound. 1 covered each of the suspected auxiliary locations, and the IMSI catcher continued to intercept communications. The Predator drone arrived on station, providing thermal imaging of the entire area. Multiple heat signatures in the primary target compound, reported the Predator operator over our secure communication link. 4 individuals in the main room, consistent with previous observations. I controlled one of the nano-drones, positioning it outside a window to provide visual confirmation. The 4 men matched our previous surveillance, with Rashid clearly identifiable among them. Everything appeared consistent with our intelligence picture. Then Miller spotted the approaching motorcycles, and the situation began to evolve rapidly. 4 new individuals arriving, I confirmed through the nano-drone feed. All armed, moving with tactical awareness. These aren't civilian visitors. The other compounds? Bauer asked sharply. Schneider checked the feeds from the drones monitoring. The auxiliary locations. No change in activity. 1 compound appears empty. The other has the same 2 individuals we've been tracking. They're consolidating, Bauer concluded. Preparing for something. Inform assault team that target is likely aware of potential compromise. The next 30 minutes brought increased activity that our combined technical assets tracked in real time. More fighters arrived, bringing the total to 12 armed individuals in the main compound. Weapons were distributed, including several RPGs. Cellular communication spiked, though much of it was conducted in coded language our interpreter couldn't fully decipher. They're preparing for either an attack or to repel one, I assessed, watching the tactical deployment through the nano-drone's camera. They've positioned fighters covering all approaches to the compound. Bauer made the difficult decision. We're canceling tonight's operation. The element of surprise is lost. And the risk profile has changed significantly. He was right, of course. Technical intelligence had given us extraordinary visibility into the target's location and composition. But human intelligence, whether from our sources or from the Taliban's own informant network, had changed the operational reality. Our technology could show us the fighters preparing their defenses, but it couldn't tell us how they knew to prepare. As we prepared to withdraw our observation team, the full integration of technical and human intelligence sources revealed one final surprise. A message from headquarters, based on signals intelligence intercepted by our American allies, indicated that Rashid planned to personally lead an attack on a German convoy the following morning. Rather than capturing him in his compound, an elaborate ambush was prepared along the convoy route. The operation that followed combined the best of both intelligence approaches: technical assets, drones, signals interception, thermal imaging, monitored the ambush site, and tracked Taliban movements, while human intelligence from trusted Afghan sources helped identify the specific vehicles Rashid would use and his likely approach route. When Rashid's fighter group initiated their attack, they found not a vulnerable convoy but a prepared NATO force with overwhelming firepower. The resulting engagement lasted less than 10 minutes, with Rashid and 7 fighters captured and the remainder neutralized or scattered. During the debriefing at our forward operating base, the intelligence officer highlighted the complementary nature of our technical and human information sources. The technology gave us incredible real-time visibility, he noted. But without human sources, we wouldn't have known about the tunnel system or the planned attack. And without the technical assets, we couldn't have monitored Rashid's movements with sufficient precision to spring the counter-ambush. For the KSK operators who had spent days conducting the reconnaissance, the lesson was clear. Technology had transformed our capabilities, allowing a small team to gather intelligence that would have required dozens of personnel in previous conflicts. The nano-drones, electronic interception, and thermal imaging had provided unprecedented situational awareness. Yet Afghanistan remained, fundamentally, a human conflict. The most sophisticated sensors could be defeated by simple countermeasures or rendered irrelevant by unexpected human decisions. The key to effective operations wasn't choosing between technical and human intelligence, but understanding how to integrate them, recognizing the strengths and limitations of each. As we packed our equipment for return to the main German base, I carefully stored the Black Hornet nano-drone that had given us such remarkable visibility into our target's activities. The tiny aircraft represented the cutting edge of military technology, yet its effectiveness had ultimately depended on human factors: the skill of its operator, the context provided by human sources, and the decisions made by commanders interpreting its feed. "Impressive toy," commented Feldwebel Müller as he watched me secure the drone. "But still just a tool." "A very good tool," I corrected him, "but only as good as the people using it." In the end, that was perhaps the most important lesson from our mission in Kunduz. Technology had changed the methods of warfare dramatically, but not its essential nature. Behind every drone, every sensor, every communication intercept stood human beings making decisions based on their interpretation of the information received. The challenge wasn't acquiring data. Our technical systems excelled at that, but transforming that data into understanding. As NATO forces increasingly relied on technological solutions in Afghanistan, those of us on the ground recognized a truth that sometimes escaped planners and politicians. Technology could show us what was happening, but rarely why it was happening. For that, we still needed the human element, the cultural understanding, the personal relationships, the intuitive grasp of motivation and intent that no algorithm could fully capture. In the continuing hunt for targets like Abdul Rashid, we would employ every technical advantage at our disposal. But we would never forget that in this ancient land, where warfare had been conducted for thousands of years before the invention of electricity, much less micro-drones, the human dimension remained paramount. Our most sophisticated surveillance equipment was worthless without the human intelligence to guide it and the human judgment to interpret its findings. That balance, between the silicon chip and the human mind, between the drone's camera and the observer's eye, between technical capability and human understanding, would determine success or failure in the shadows of Kunduz and beyond. Caporal-Chef Haik Kanayan, 33 years old. Sniper Team, 2e Régiment Étranger de Parachutistes, French Foreign Legion, born in Yerevan, Armenia. The Taliban commander finally appeared in my scope's crosshairs at precisely the moment I desperately needed to sneeze. 14 hours of absolute stillness in the Afghan dust apparently meant nothing to my nasal passages, which chose this perfect moment for rebellion. Of course, why wouldn't my body betray me now? It was, after all, the Legion way. We signed up for suffering. Target acquired, I whispered to Caporal Rousseau, my spotter, the tickle in my nose becoming nearly unbearable. Distance 875 meters, wind 3 knots from west, humidity 40%, temperature 34 Celsius. Confirmed, Rousseau muttered, his voice the perfect monotone of a man who'd been lying motionless beside me since before dawn. Positive identification on target Alpha. You are cleared to fire when ready. I inhaled slowly, controlling the pressure in my sinuses while simultaneously preparing for the shot. The Taliban commander, a man responsible for the deaths of at least 12 French soldiers, stood casually drinking tea, completely unaware that he was being watched through a 24-power Schmidt and Bender scope from nearly a kilometer away. The FRF-2 sniper rifle felt like an extension of my body after years of training. 7.62 NATO round loaded, cheek welded to the stock, breathing controlled, finger applying gentle pressure to the trigger. And then the sneeze came. Not explosively. Thank whatever God watches over snipers. I managed to suppress most of it, but my body tensed involuntarily. Disaster in any other circumstance, but somehow, miraculously, I squeezed the trigger at exactly the right millisecond. Through the scope, I watched the commander's head snap backwards, his body collapsing like a marionette with cut strings. His bodyguards looked around in confusion, having no idea where the shot had come from. Target down, Rousseau confirmed flatly. Clean kill. Now perhaps we can leave this godforsaken position before I have to soil myself in front of you. That would be awkward for our professional relationship. I allowed myself a thin smile. The French Foreign Legion, where men from 30 different nations united under the French flag with one common purpose: to complain spectacularly while accomplishing the impossible. We had just eliminated a high-value target after 2 weeks of intelligence gathering and 14 hours in a hide position, and all Rousseau could think about was his bladder. 2 weeks in Afghanistan, I replied, beginning the meticulous process of breaking down my rifle. And you still haven't learned to appreciate the local amenities? The endless dust? The charming scorpions? The magnificent smell of goat dung that permeates everything? Rousseau snorted quietly. Next time, I'm joining the Danish army. I hear they get pastries on deployment. As we carefully erased all evidence of our position and prepared for extraction, I reflected on the strange path that had brought me here. An Armenian immigrant in the French Foreign Legion, killing people in Afghanistan for reasons that seemed increasingly abstract with each passing day. But such philosophical thoughts were dangerous luxuries in our line of work. Right now, we had 8 kilometers of hostile territory to cross before reaching our extraction point. Radio check, I whispered, testing our communications with the quick reaction force that would rendezvous with us after dark. Legion sniper. Team, this is Falcon Actual, came the accented voice of Lieutenant Perrier. Confirm mission status over. Falcon Actual, target neutralized, I reported. Beginning extraction over. Bien, proceed to rendezvous point. Falcon out. Rousseau raised an eyebrow at me. Want to bet the QRF will be late? I never bet on certainties, I replied, securing my weapon. Now move your ass, Legionnaire. Death waits for no man, but the French military bureaucracy makes everyone wait. My journey to become a sniper in the famed 2E rep began 5 years earlier when I left behind a failing construction business and bitter divorce in Yerevan. The French Foreign Legion offered what I needed most: a fresh start, a new identity, and a chance to be part of something with purpose. What they didn't advertise in the recruitment materials was the peculiar blend of elite military professionalism and absurdist dark humor that defined Legion culture. After surviving the brutal selection process and basic training at Castelnaudary, I was assigned to the 2E Régiment Étranger de Parachutistes, the Legion's paratroop regiment and rapid reaction force. My background as a competitive marksman in Armenia caught the attention of the regiment's sniper section, leading to specialized training and eventually my current role. Legionnaires came from everywhere: former Russian soldiers, Brazilian street fighters, British ex-commandos, American adventurers, African rebels, Eastern European laborers. We spoke a dozen languages but communicated in mangled French, the unifying tongue of our adopted military home. The Legion didn't care about our pasts, only our performance. Legio Patria Nostra, the Legion is our country, wasn't just a motto, but a lived reality. Our deployment to Afghanistan as part of France's contribution to NATO forces marked my 3rd combat tour. While American and British forces dominated the southern provinces, French operations focused on Kapisa and parts of Wardak, areas with challenging terrain and persistent Taliban presence. 2 weeks earlier, our 4-man sniper section had received orders for Operation Viper, a mission to eliminate a Taliban commander known as the Teacher, responsible for coordinating complex attacks against French and Afghan forces. Intelligence had tracked him to a remote village in the mountains of Wardak province, where he periodically emerged to meet with local cell leaders. The target has a routine, explained Captain Moreau during our briefing. Every 2 weeks he travels from Pakistan to meet with his lieutenants. He stays for approximately 72 hours, then disappears back across the border. Our window of opportunity is narrow. The mission required a 2-man sniper team to infiltrate the area days in advance, establish a hide position, confirm the target's identity, eliminate him, and extract without detection. Rousseau and I were selected based on our previous operations together, a partnership that had proven effective despite, or perhaps because of, our constant sardonic banter. The hide location is approximately 1,000 meters from the target. Building, Captain Moreau continued, indicating the position on a topographical map. You'll need to carry all supplies for a minimum of 5 days. No resupply is possible without compromising your position. Rousseau had rolled his eyes slightly. Wonderful. 5 days without a shower. The Legion truly spoils us. You joined. For the cuisine and accommodations, Rousseau? Captain Moreau replied with equal sarcasm. How disappointing for you. Our insertion occurred under cover of darkness, delivered by helicopter to a landing zone 15 kilometers from the target village. From there, we moved on foot through mountain passes and dry riverbeds, avoiding the few roads and populated areas. The terrain was brutal, rocky slopes, narrow defiles, and exposed ridgelines that offered minimal concealment. Afghanistan's mountains had broken armies since Alexander the Great, and they showed no more mercy to 2 legionnaires carrying 40-kilogram packs. If I wanted to hike with heavy weights, I could have joined a mountaineering club, Rousseau muttered as we climbed yet another steep incline in the pre-dawn darkness. They probably have better snacks. And fewer people trying to kill you, I added, though I've heard alpine rescue is quite competitive. We reached our designated position on the second night, a rocky outcropping with excellent sight lines to the village, while offering concealment from casual observation. Establishing a sniper hide was meticulous work, requiring patience and attention to detail. We carefully constructed our position using local materials to break up our silhouette, ensuring it appeared natural from all angles. Beneath the camouflage, we created a space barely large enough for 2 men to lie prone with our equipment. The next 3 days were an exercise in discomfort and monotony. We observed the village in shifts, documenting patterns of life, identifying key individuals, and confirming intelligence reports. The temperature swung wildly, blistering heat. During the day, near freezing at night. We rationed water carefully, eating only cold rations to avoid creating heat signatures. Bodily functions were managed with clinical efficiency, using sealed bags that we carried with us. The unglamorous reality of covert observation posts. You know, Rousseau whispered during one interminable afternoon watch. My recruiter mentioned exotic locations and adventure. He failed to specify that adventure meant marinating in my own sweat while watching goat herds for days on end. You should file a complaint with Legion customer service, I replied, scanning the village through binoculars. I'm sure they'll issue a full refund. Ha! The Legion's refund policy is a bullet if you try to desert, not the most consumer-friendly organization. On the 4th day, our patience was rewarded when a small convoy of vehicles arrived at the village. Through our high-powered optics, we observed a man matching our target's description enter the main building. Tall, with a distinctive limp and full beard. However, confirmation required visual identification of specific facial features, which meant waiting for a clear line of sight. Target Alpha has arrived, I reported through our secure communication system, awaiting confirmation of identity. Understood, came the response from our command post at forwarding operating base Nijrab. Maintain position and await authorization. That authorization came the following morning after we transmitted photographs for facial recognition analysis. The order was direct: eliminate the target at the first opportunity that minimized risk of civilian casualties. Finally, Rousseau sighed. I was beginning to think we'd retire here, build a little stone cottage, perhaps raise some goats. Your fascination with the local goats is concerning, Rousseau. When you've stared at them for 4 days straight, you develop a relationship. Not a good relationship, but a relationship, nonetheless. Our opportunity came later that afternoon when the target emerged to speak with his guards in the central courtyard of the compound. The shot was complex, 875 meters, with variable wind conditions and the need to account for temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure. Every environmental factor affected the bullet's trajectory at that distance. After the successful elimination and our hasty departure from the hide position, we began the most dangerous phase of the operation: extraction through potentially hostile territory. Taliban fighters would be searching for whoever had killed their commander, and local sympathizers might alert them to our movement. We traveled only at night, using natural terrain features for concealment and avoiding all established paths. Our progress was slow but methodical, prioritizing security over speed. The FR-F2 rifle, broken down and distributed between our packs, added to our burden but couldn't be abandoned. Each weapon was meticulously accounted for in the Legion's inventory, and explaining its loss would be more painful than carrying it. If we survive this, Rousseau whispered as we navigated a particularly treacherous mountain pass. I'm requesting transfer to the Legion's bakery. Do we have a bakery? No, but we have a brass band. You could play the triangle. Tempting. Less. Walking. Though I imagine the uniform is even more ridiculous than our normal parade dress. Near dawn on the extraction day, we encountered a 3-man Taliban patrol moving along a ridgeline that overlooked our route. There was no way to bypass them without adding hours to our journey and missing our extraction window. 3 tangos, 200 meters north, I murmured, indicating their position. Armed with AKs and 1 RPG, Rousseau assessed the situation with professional detachment. Unavoidable. Take the 2 on the left. I'll handle RPG man. We prepared our secondary weapons, suppressed famous rifles that provided less noise signature than our standard issue. The engagement was brief and clinical. 3 targets neutralized without alerting other potential hostiles in the area. We quickly searched the bodies for intelligence materials and continued our movement, aware that the dead men would eventually be discovered. That's going to complicate matters, Rousseau observed as we moved away from the engagement site. Their friends will be looking for them soon. All the more reason to reach extraction on schedule. For once, I hope the French military defies its reputation for fashionable lateness. We reached the rendezvous coordinates shortly before midnight, establishing a defensive position while awaiting our extraction helicopter. The designated time came and went. 15 minutes, then 30, then an hour with no sign of our transportation. How reassuring to see some traditions remain sacred, Rousseau remarked dryly. The Legion may put us through hell, but at least we can count on French pilots to be precisely unpunctual. Finally, our radio crackled with the news that the helicopter was inbound, delayed by mechanical issues that had required last-minute repairs. The distinctive thump of rotors soon became audible, growing louder as the Puma helicopter approached our position. We marked the landing zone with infrared chemilights visible only through night vision devices. The helicopter touched down just long enough for us to board before lifting off again, banking sharply away from the mountains and toward the relative safety of Fob Nidrab. Seated on the metal bench of the helicopter's cargo compartment, I felt the tension of the past week begin to dissolve. Another successful mission, another skilled elimination of a legitimate military target. The strategic impact remained to be seen. In counterinsurgency warfare, killing one commander often meant simply creating a vacancy for another to fill. But such philosophical concerns were above our pay grade. Do you ever wonder if any of this makes a difference? Rousseau asked, echoing my thoughts with uncharacteristic seriousness. Not our concern, I replied, falling back on Legion pragmatism. We received orders. We executed them effectively. The rest is for the generals and politicians. How very Legion of you, he said with a tired smile. Complete the mission, complain eloquently, repeat until retirement or death. There's a third option, transfer to the Legion bakery. His laughter was barely audible over the helicopter's engine noise, but it carried the dark humor that sustained us through missions like this, the ability to find absurdity in the deadly serious business of war. The French Foreign Legion hadn't survived for nearly 2 centuries by being optimistic about human nature or the grand purpose of military interventions. It survived by training men to execute impossible missions while maintaining a sardonic perspective on the whole enterprise. As FOB Nidrab appeared below us, I mentally prepared for what came next. Debriefings, equipment maintenance, mission, reports, and eventually new orders. The war in Afghanistan, like Legion service itself, was a cycle of preparation, execution, and reflection, punctuated by moments of extreme danger and lengthy periods of tedium. "Home, sweet shipping container," Rousseau remarked as we prepared to disembark. "Do you think they saved us any of that mystery meat from the French field rations? Probably. No one else would eat it, even among the Americans who'll eat anything." Magnificent. Nothing says, "Thank you for risking your life," quite like processed meat of uncertain origin. We stepped off the helicopter onto the dusty landing zone. 2 Legionnaires returning from the shadows with a completed mission and dark humor intact, the twin hallmarks of the Setter Grep's professional killers. Legio Patria Nostra. Master Sergeant Ryan Blackwood, 36 years old. 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. Born in Portland, Maine. The village seemed wrong from the moment we entered. Too quiet, too empty, too clean. My eyes constantly swept the mud brick structures, searching for the telltale wires of IEDs or subtle signs of ambush positions. Every doorway held potential death. Every window concealed a possible observer. I'd survived 3 previous rotations in this godforsaken country by trusting the crawling sensation along my spine that told me when something wasn't right. "Building clear," whispered Johnson through our radio network, his voice tense despite his professional control. "No occupants, but food still warm on the table." "Same here," Ellis confirmed from another structure. "Beds made, water containers full." They left in a hurry, and not long ago. Lieutenant Hayes motioned for me to join him in the small courtyard. At the center of the village, 6 mud brick houses surrounding an ancient well. Intelligence had identified this remote settlement in Paktika province as a transit point for Taliban fighters crossing from Pakistan. Our mission was to establish surveillance and identify key facilitators in the network. But you can't surveil a ghost town. "What's your assessment, Blackwood?" Hayes asked quietly, his eyes continuously scanning our surroundings. "It's a setup," I replied without hesitation. The villagers were warned. Either they're waiting to hit us, or they're watching to see what we do. Hayes nodded, his expression grim behind his facial camouflage. "We're too exposed here. We need to pull back and reassess." A sudden movement caught my eye. A chicken emerging from behind a small storage shed. The ordinary sight seemed obscenely out of place in the unnatural stillness of the village. As I watched, the bird began pecking at the hard-packed earth, completely unconcerned by our presence. "Sir," I said, my mouth suddenly dry, "that chicken isn't afraid of us." Hayes looked at me sharply, immediately understanding. Rural Afghan chickens scattered at the approach of strangers, a survival instinct in a land of predators, both human and animal. But this one behaved as if we were familiar, as if it had seen American soldiers before. Recently. "Abort. Mission," Hayes whispered into his radio. "Possible compromise. Exfil Route 2. Move now." As we melted back toward the tree line, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The empty village behind us seemed to follow our movement, with a malevolent awareness. In Afghanistan, paranoia wasn't a mental disorder. It was a survival mechanism. And right now, mine was screaming. The mission had begun 36 hours earlier, with an intelligence briefing at our forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan. Our Delta Squadron had been conducting operations in the region for 3 months, focusing on high-value Taliban targets moving across the Pakistan border. Lieutenant Hayes, our team leader, had gathered us in the secure planning room to outline our newest tasking. "Gentlemen, we've got a time-sensitive opportunity," he explained, pointing to satellite imagery of a small village. "Signals intelligence has identified consistent satellite phone activity from this location, correlating with known Taliban movements across the border. Analysis suggests this village serves as a way station for fighters entering Afghanistan. The imagery showed a typical Afghan settlement, 6 structures arranged around a central well, surrounded by terraced agricultural fields. Its remote location in a narrow valley made it ideal for clandestine movement. No main roads, minimal civilian traffic, and multiple escape routes into the surrounding mountains. Our mission is passive surveillance, Hayes continued. We insert, under cover of darkness, establish observation posts, and document individuals moving through the area. Priority is on identifying key facilitators and their methods. This is strictly intelligence gathering, no direct action unless compromised. The 8 members of our team studied the terrain model and satellite photographs, memorizing approach routes, defensive positions, and emergency extraction plans. After 3 rotations in Afghanistan, I recognized the importance of this meticulous preparation. The smallest oversight could mean death in a country where the enemy blended seamlessly with the civilian population. Blackwood, you'll lead the security element, Hayes said, acknowledging my experience. Johnson and Ellis handle the technical surveillance package. The rest of us maintain perimeter security and provide overwatch. I nodded, already mentally cataloging the equipment we'd need. Counterinsurgency operations were a delicate balance. Too much firepower risked civilian casualties and mission failure. Too little left us vulnerable to the Taliban's home field advantage. After years in Afghanistan, I had developed a sixth sense for what each mission required, an instinct born from witnessing too many good operators die from seemingly minor oversights. We spent the remainder of the day preparing equipment and conducting rehearsals. Our insertion would be via helicopter, landing at an offset location 5 kilometers from the target village, followed by a night movement across difficult terrain. Each man checked and rechecked his weapon, communications gear, and surveillance equipment. In Delta, this attention to detail wasn't paranoia. It was standard procedure that had saved our lives countless times. As I inspected my suppressed M4 carbine, Master Sergeant Wilson approached. At 42, he was the oldest member of our team, and a veteran of operations dating back to the earliest days of the Afghanistan conflict. "What's your gut telling you about this one, Blackwood?" he asked quietly, away from the others. I hesitated before answering. Something feels rushed. Intelligence is thin for a village that's supposedly a key transit node. If it's that important, why are we just now hitting it? Wilson nodded, his weathered face revealing nothing. Could be time-sensitive intelligence. Could be someone up the chain needs to show progress on their PowerPoint slides. Either way, we're the ones walking into the unknown, I finished. Keep your head on a swivel, he said simply, before returning to his own preparations. We inserted at 0200 hours, the helicopter dropping us at a small clearing before immediately departing. The night was moonless, perfect for our movement, but equally advantageous for any enemy observers. We navigated using night vision goggles, moving slowly through the broken terrain, every sense heightened to detect potential threats. Afghanistan at night was a different world, eerily quiet yet filled with subtle sounds that kept your nerves constantly on edge. The distant howl of a dog might be a signal between Taliban spotters. The shifting stones beneath your feet could trigger a hidden IED. The rustling in nearby bushes might be a goat or an enemy fighter preparing an ambush. We reached our initial observation position outside the village shortly before dawn, establishing a concealed location with good sight lines to the settlement below. Through high-powered optics, we observed normal morning activities, a few villagers emerging to tend animals, smoke rising from cooking fires, children carrying water from the well. Looks consistent with the intelligence assessment, Hayes murmured, as we cataloged the movements. Approximately 20 civilians, primarily women and children. Few military-aged males present. That's the first red flag, I replied. In a village this size, there should be more men. For 6 hours, we maintained our surveillance, documenting routines, and identifying potential Taliban presence. Nothing obvious emerged. No weapons caches, no unusual gatherings, no suspicious communications. The village appeared deceptively normal, which only heightened my unease. By early afternoon, Hayes made the decision to move closer. We need better observation angles for the technical surveillance. We'll approach from the east, using the terraced fields for cover. We advanced slowly, maintaining security, while Johnson and Ellis prepared the suite of surveillance equipment, directional microphones, cameras with facial recognition capability, and electronic signal interceptors. Still, nothing suggested immediate threat. Yet the crawling sensation between my shoulder blades intensified with each step closer to the village. Then, approximately 400 meters from the settlement, everything changed. The normal sounds of village life, children playing, animals vocalizing, women calling to each other, suddenly ceased. The natural rhythm of daily activity stopped as if someone had flipped a switch. "Hold position," I whispered, raising my fist to halt our movement. "Something's wrong." We froze in place, scanning the area through our optics. No movement was visible in the village, no obvious threat detected, yet every instinct screamed danger. We maintained our position for 20 minutes, observing the unnatural stillness of the settlement. "Could they be at prayer?" suggested Ellis, the junior member of our team. Wilson shook his head. "Not prayer time, and even then, the animals don't observe religious customs." Hayes considered our options. The mission remained a priority, yet the sudden change in village activity represented a potential threat. After brief deliberation, he made his decision. We proceed, but with maximum caution. Blackwood, take point with Wilson. Establish a security perimeter before we bring in the surveillance equipment. We approach the village using every available cover, moving from one position of concealment to another. No shots were fired, no alarm raised. Yet the silence felt more threatening than any overt attack. As we reached the first structures, the emptiness of the village became apparent. What from a distance had appeared to be a functioning settlement was now revealed as completely deserted. That's when we conducted our initial search of the buildings, discovering the unsettling signs of recent occupation and hasty departure. The warm food, the made beds, the full water containers, and then the chicken that sealed our decision to abort. A simple farm animal that had inadvertently revealed a deadly truth. "Move out, maintain intervals, watch for triggers," Hayes ordered as we withdrew from the village. We retreated along our planned emergency exfiltration route, every sense hyper-alert for the ambush we expected at any moment. The feeling of being watched intensified with each step, though our thermal scopes revealed no heat signatures of hidden observers. 2 kilometers from the village, as we moved through a narrow ravine, Wilson suddenly raised his fist to halt our movement. He pointed silently to a barely visible line crossing our path at ankle height. The nearly invisible wire would have triggered whatever deadly arrangement awaited us, likely a daisy chain of IEDs positioned to funnel us into a kill zone. "They knew our exfil route," Johnson whispered, voicing what we all realized. "That's impossible unless the mission was compromised before we even left base," I finished. Hayes made a rapid decision. New route. We moved southwest across Tabari, the ridge, then circle back to Extraction Point Bravo. Avoid all natural channeling terrain. For the next 4 hours, we moved through some of the most difficult terrain in the region, deliberately avoiding any path that could conceal pre-positioned ambushes. The physical exertion was extreme, but fear provided ample energy. Not the paralyzing fear of the inexperienced, but the focused, calculating fear of veteran operators who understood exactly how precarious our situation had become. As darkness fell, we reached our alternate extraction point and established a defensive position while awaiting helicopter pickup. The communications specialist made contact with headquarters, reporting our aborted mission and requesting immediate extraction. "Negative contact throughout movement," Hayes reported through the encrypted channel, but multiple signs of pre-positioned ambush. Possible compromise of mission parameters prior to execution. The response was immediate. "Understood. Extraction inbound. ETA 20 minutes. Be advised, we have reports of increased enemy communications in your vicinity." Those 20 minutes stretched into an eternity of hypervigilance. Every shadow contained a potential attacker. Every distant sound might herald the beginning of an assault. We positioned ourselves in a tight defensive perimeter, each man covering specific sectors of fire. our backs to a sheer rock face that prevented approach from behind. When the beat of helicopter rotors finally became audible, relief was palpable yet tempered by the knowledge that the extraction point represented a moment of maximum vulnerability. The Taliban had shot down enough helicopters in Afghanistan to make every landing a calculated risk. The Black Hawk appeared as a darker shadow against the night sky, executing a rapid descent to minimize exposure. We moved quickly toward the aircraft as it touched down, maintaining security while boarding in practiced sequence. Within 30 seconds, we were airborne again, climbing sharply away from the threatening landscape below. Only when we were safely back at base did the full implications of our experience become clear. Subsequent intelligence analysis revealed a disturbing pattern. 3 other special operations missions in the region had encountered similar situations. Villages inexplicably evacuated just before arrival, signs of hasty departure, and pre-positioned ambushes along likely withdrawal routes. "We have a security breach," the intelligence officer concluded during our debriefing. "Someone with access to operational planning is passing information to the Taliban." The revelation sent a chill through every operator present. In counterinsurgency, warfare, information security was life itself. If mission details were being compromised, every operation became a potential death trap. In the days that followed, I found sleep increasingly elusive. Each night, I replayed our aborted mission, analyzing decisions, questioning observations, searching for missed indicators. The sensation of being watched lingered even within the supposed security of our base. Conversations became more guarded, trust more conditional, suspicion more pervasive. Our next operation was postponed pending a security review, leaving us in limbo, trained killers with no outlet for our heightened vigilance. I found myself studying the Afghan interpreters and support personnel with new wariness, watching for signs of deception or divided loyalty. Even among fellow Americans, I caught myself noting unusual behaviors or questioning routine decisions. Was this healthy operational security or the beginning of paranoia? In Afghanistan, the line between appropriate caution and obsessive fear was razor thin. The most paranoid operators often survived the longest, yet at a cost to their psychological well-being that manifested in countless subtle ways. 1 week after our aborted mission, intelligence identified the likely source of the security breach. An Afghan contractor with access to the base operations center had been using a hidden phone to communicate with Taliban facilitators. He was quietly detained and removed for interrogation, and mission planning resumed with enhanced security protocols. Yet even with the identified breach contained, the sense of vulnerability remained. In the counterinsurgency environment of Afghanistan, certainty was a luxury none of us could afford. Every village might conceal enemies. Every apparent ally might harbor divided loyalties. Every mission might be compromised before it began. As we prepared for our next operation, I checked and rechecked my equipment with methodical precision, controlling the variables within my power, while accepting the myriad threats beyond my control. This was the psychological reality of our war, a constant balance between necessary vigilance and debilitating paranoia, between trusting your instincts and questioning your perceptions. The village that wasn't there had taught us a valuable lesson. In Afghanistan, fear wasn't weakness but wisdom. The empty buildings, the warm food, the unafraid chicken. These ordinary details had triggered the survival instinct that kept us alive to fight another day. Some might call it paranoia. We called it coming home alive. Chief Petty Officer Alexander Mitchell, 31 years old, SEAL Team 6, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, born in San Diego, California. The night vision cast the mountain valley in an eerie green glow as we approached the compound. 6 mud brick buildings arranged in a rough circle, exactly as the drone footage had shown. Our target, Mullah Ibrahim Haqqani, a high-level Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout Kunar province, was allegedly inside the main structure. Intelligence placed him there with 90% confidence, meeting with local commanders to plan their next offensive. I raised my fist, signaling the team to halt at our final concealment position 300 meters from the objective. Something felt wrong. The intelligence brief had indicated minimal security, 2 or 3 guards at most, but I could identify at least 8 armed men patrolling the perimeter. More concerning was the presence of what appeared to be non-combatants. Through my advanced optics, I could see women and children moving between buildings despite the late hour. Sierra 2 actual. We have multiple civilians on objective, I whispered into my radio. I count at least 6, including 3 children. Request guidance. The response from our mission commander was immediate but unhelpful. Rules of engagement remain in effect. Minimize civilian casualties. Proceed with capture operation. I exchanged glances with Chief Watson, my second in command. Our rules of engagement were clear. Capture was preferred over kill, and civilian casualties were to be avoided at all costs. But experience had taught us that rigid adherence to these rules had cost American lives before. If Haqqani's security detected our approach, the operation could quickly descend into a firefight where those same civilians might become casualties regardless of our intentions. We need to abort, Watson suggested quietly. Come back when the objective is clear of non-combatants. I studied the compound again. Intelligence indicated Haqqani would be gone by morning, back across the Pakistani border where we couldn't follow. This might be our only opportunity to capture a man whose network had killed dozens of Americans. But proceeding meant potentially placing civilians in the crossfire. The moral calculus of special operations was never simple. Official policy demanded we protect innocent life, but our primary mission was to neutralize threats to American forces. The gap between these imperatives had to be navigated by men on the ground, making split-second decisions in the dark. Men like me. Sierra 2 actual, we are evaluating approach options that minimize civilian exposure, I reported, buying time to assess the situation. Request authorization for modified breach plan. As I waited for a response, a young girl emerged from the main building, carrying what appeared to be a water jug. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. In that moment, the abstract concept of civilian casualties transformed into something unbearably concrete. Behind her, a man appeared in the doorway, tall, with a distinctive beard matching Haqqani's description. Our target, and an innocent child, separated by mere feet. The decision I made next would define not just the mission's outcome, but who we were as warriors operating in the moral shadowlands of asymmetric warfare. The operation had begun 18 hours earlier at our forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan. Lieutenant Commander Harris, our troop commander, had gathered the assault team for a pre-mission brief in the secure planning room. Gentlemen, we have time-sensitive intelligence on Ibrahim Haqqani, he announced, pinning satellite imagery to the briefing board. Signals intelligence intercepted communications indicating he's meeting with local cell leaders at this compound in the Kunar Valley tonight. This is the closest we've come to him in 6 months. Haqqani was a high-value target, responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout northeastern Afghanistan. His network specialized in complex ambushes and had been linked to at least 27 American casualties over the past year. Mission parameters are capture preferred, kill authorized, Harris continued. We want to exploit any intelligence he might provide on cross-border networks and upcoming operations. The compound is isolated approximately 2 kilometers from the nearest village, which should minimize civilian presence. The intelligence officer stepped forward with additional details. Drone surveillance shows minimal security presence, typically 2 or 3 guards. The compound is a family residence belonging to a local elder sympathetic to the Taliban. Our source indicates Haqqani arrived yesterday with a small security detail and plans to depart before dawn tomorrow. We studied the terrain models and rehearsed breach options. Our 8-man team would insert via helicopter at an offset landing zone, then approach on foot through the mountainous terrain. 2 snipers would establish an overwatch position, while the assault element breached the compound. Rules of engagement are standard, Harris reminded us. Positive identification required before engagement. All efforts to minimize civilian casualties, if encountered. Questions? Chief Watson raised his hand. Contingency if we encounter unexpected civilian presence. Assess and report, Harris replied. Mission Command will provide guidance based on situation. If civilians are present in numbers that compromise the operation, we have authorization to abort and exfil. The briefing continued with communications protocols, extraction plans, and intelligence updates. Throughout, I found myself returning to Watson's question. My 16 years in the SEALs had taught me that pre-mission guidance rarely accounted for the complex realities on the ground. The gap between policy and practice was where operators lived, and sometimes died. We inserted at 2300 hours, the helicopter dropping us at a remote landing zone 7 kilometers from the objective. The night was clear, with minimal cloud cover, providing good visibility through our night vision devices but also potentially exposing our movement to observation. The approach route took us through steep mountain terrain, following goat paths, and dry stream beds to avoid potential surveillance. Afghanistan's mountains were unforgiving, loose rock that could trigger deadly slides, narrow passages that created fatal bottlenecks, elevation that sapped strength and slowed movement. We navigated these challenges in silence, each man focused on the terrain and potential threats. 3 hours into our movement, we received an intelligence update via secure communications. Be advised, signals intelligence indicates increased communications at target location. Possible additional personnel on site. Watson glanced at me, his expression hidden by darkness, but his concern evident in his posture. Additional personnel meant additional risk. More guns, more witnesses, more potential for the operation to go sideways. But the mission continued. We reached our observation position at 0245 hours, establishing visual contact with the compound. Immediately, the discrepancy between intelligence and reality became apparent. Instead of 2 or 3 guards, the compound had at least 8 armed men patrolling its perimeter. More concerning was the civilian presence that hadn't been detected by drone surveillance. Women and children moving between buildings despite the late hour. Sierra 2 actual. This is Sierra 2-1, I reported through our secure communication system. Visual on objective. Multiple armed individuals exceeding intelligence estimate. Multiple civilians present. Request updated guidance. The response came from the Joint Operations Center, relayed through our communication specialist. Acknowledge civilian presence. Rules of engagement remain in effect. Mission priority remains capture of target. Proceed with caution. The disconnect between the sterile language of the operations center and the reality before us was stark. Proceed with caution meant navigating a complex ethical terrain where any misstep could result in civilian deaths or mission failure, possibly both. Options? I asked Watson and the team leaders in a hushed conference. We can establish sniper positions and wait for the civilians to enter a single structure, then execute breach on the main building, suggested Petty Officer Ramirez, our lead assaulter. If they detect us during the approach, we could have a hostage situation, countered Watson. These aren't enemy combatants. They're kids who happen to be born in the wrong place. Mission Command says proceed, reminded our radio operator. Mission. Command isn't looking at children through their optics, Watson replied flatly. The tension between our orders and the reality before us crystallized in that moment. We had been trained to follow rules of engagement that presumed clear distinctions between combatants and civilians, distinctions that rarely existed in the complex human terrain of Afghanistan. Our superiors expected us to capture Haqqani while minimizing civilian casualties, but put the responsibility for threading that near impossible needle on operators on the ground. I made my decision. We modify the approach. Sniper team establishes Overwatch with authorization to engage any combatant who presents immediate threat. Assault element circles around to the eastern approach, where we have better cover and separation from the civilian structures. We breach only the main building, secure the target, and extract immediately. This compromise represented the best balance between mission objectives and civilian protection, but it increased our own risk significantly. The eastern approach had less cover and would expose us to potential detection for a longer period. If compromised during our approach, we would be in a tactically disadvantageous position. As we prepared to execute this modified plan, the scenario continued to evolve. The young girl emerged from the main building, followed by the man matching Haqqani's description. Through my optics, I could see his distinctive facial features, confirming target identification. But the proximity of the child created an impossible tactical situation. Any attempt to capture Haqqani while she was present carried unacceptable risk to her safety. Hold position, I ordered quietly. Wait for separation from the child. Minutes passed as we maintained our observation. Haqqani remained in the doorway, speaking with one of his guards while the girl filled her water container from a central well. Our window of opportunity was closing. Dawn was approximately 90 minutes away, and with daylight would come increased security and greater risk of detection. Sierra 2-1, this is Sierra Actual, came the voice of Lieutenant Commander Harris, who had apparently taken direct control of mission communications. Intelligence indicates target preparing for imminent departure. Execute or abort, your call. Over. The decision was mine. Proceed with a high-risk operation that might endanger civilians, or abort and allow a high-value target to escape. There was no middle ground, no perfect solution that satisfied both our mission parameters and our moral obligations. In that moment, I thought of the American soldiers who had died in Haqqani's ambushes, of the future attacks he would coordinate, if allowed to escape. I also thought of the child by the well, innocent of any crime except being born in a war zone. Sierra Actual, this is Sierra 2-1. We are aborting. Civilian presence makes capture operation untenable under current ROE. Requesting authorization for precision strike once civilians clear target structure. Over. There was a long pause before the response came. Sierra 2-1, Sierra Actual, abort confirmed. Maintain observation. Hellfire-equipped Predator inbound, ETA 30 minutes. Designate target when civilians clear. Out. The relief among my team was palpable, yet mixed with frustration. We had trained extensively for capture operations, preferring to take high-value targets alive for intelligence exploitation. Defaulting to a missile strike felt like failure, even if it was the option that best balanced mission requirements with civilian protection. We maintained our observation position as the compound gradually quieted. The children were led back inside residential structures, though not the main building where Haqqani remained. Guards continued their patrols, unaware of both our presence and the approaching Predator drone with its Hellfire missiles. At Joe 410 hours, we observed Haqqani and 3 others exit the main building and move toward a vehicle parked in the compound's central area. They carried bags and weapons, clearly preparing for departure. No civilians were visible in the immediate vicinity. Sierra Actual, targets moving to vehicle. No civilians in target area. Requesting immediate strike authorization. Sierra 2-1, you are cleared hot. Predator has visual, standing by for your confirmation. I designated the target area with an infrared pointer visible to the drone's sensors, but invisible to the naked eye. Target marked. Confirm Predator has positive control. Positive control confirmed. Missile away. The Hellfire struck with devastating precision, destroying the vehicle and killing Haqqani and his associates instantly. The explosion rocked the compound, sending guards scrambling for cover as we initiated our withdrawal. In the chaos, we extracted without incident, reaching our pickup zone as dawn broke over the mountains. During debriefing at our forward operating base, the intelligence officer confirmed Haqqani's death through multiple sources. The mission was deemed a success, though not in the manner originally planned. No civilian casualties were reported, the one bright spot in an operation that had forced us to default to our last resort option. You made the right call, Lieutenant Commander Harris told me privately after the formal debriefing. The rules of engagement exist for a reason, but they assume clean scenarios that rarely exist in the real world. Sometimes the best solution isn't the one in the mission plan. His words offered some reassurance, but the fundamental tension remained. We operated in a conflict where the rules often failed to account for the messy realities on the ground. The gap between policy and practice was where special operators lived. making judgment calls that balanced mission objectives against moral imperatives, with lives hanging in the balance. 2 weeks later, intelligence reported that Haqqani's death had significantly disrupted Taliban operations in Kunar province. Attacks against coalition forces decreased by nearly 60% in the following month. By that most pragmatic measure, our mission had succeeded. Yet I found myself thinking about the little girl at the well, who had unknowingly influenced the course of a special operations mission simply by being present. Her safety had been prioritized over the preferred mission plan, leading to a different approach that achieved the primary objective without endangering her. A balance of mission and morality that represented the best traditions of American Special Operations Forces. In the end, the tension between rules of engagement and survival wasn't really about our survival at all, but about whose survival we prioritized when the theoretical scenarios of mission planning collided with the complex realities of war. The rules existed to guide us, but the judgments remained ours, made in darkness under pressure, with consequences that extended far beyond any single mission or operation. That was the burden and the privilege of special operations, not just the authority to act, but the responsibility to decide when, how, and if to act. In the mountains of Afghanistan, those decisions defined not just mission success, but who we were as warriors and as human beings. Oberstabsfeldwebel Klaus Hoffmann, 35 years old. First Company, Kommando Spezialkräfte, born in Cologne, Germany. The sound of the bullet passing by my head was indescribable, not the Hollywood whine, but a sharp, brutal snap that seemed to compress the air itself. I dropped to the ground instantly, my body reacting before my mind processed what had happened. The rocky soil of northern Afghanistan tore at my hands and face as I scrambled for cover behind a small outcropping. The distant crack of the rifle reached my ears a moment later. A Taliban marksman shooting from somewhere among the scattered boulders, 600 meters up the valley. "Sniper!" I hissed into my radio, unnecessarily. My 5-man team was already flattened against the earth, seeking what little protection the barren landscape offered. We were exposed, caught in the open during our patrol through territory that intelligence had assessed as low threat. A judgment that now seemed as substantial as the dust swirling around us. From my right, Feldwebel Neumann began returning, fire with his G-36, providing cover as the rest of the team bounded backward toward better defensive positions. His disciplined 3-round bursts kicked up dirt near the suspected sniper location, but the distance made effective suppression impossible. Another shot from the Taliban position struck a rock near Stabsunteroffizier Bauer, showering him with fragments as he cursed through clenched teeth. We had been on patrol for 6 hours, moving through the valleys of Badakhshan province on a reconnaissance mission. Our extraction was still 20 kilometers and 14 hours away, through territory now obviously controlled by enemy forces. No quick reaction force would come to our aid. We were operating beyond the range of immediate support, in the shadows between official combat operations and unacknowledged special reconnaissance. "Klein is hit." Feldwebel Werner's voice cracked over the radio. Our team medic was down, clutching his thigh as blood seeped between his fingers. The wound looked serious, but not immediately life-threatening. A through-and-through that had missed the femoral artery by centimeters. I assessed our situation with cold clarity. 5 operators, 1 wounded, at least 20 kilometers from extraction, with unknown enemy forces between us and safety. No air support available for at least 6 hours due to ongoing operations elsewhere. Limited ammunition and supplies. The mathematical brutality of combat left little room for optimism. "We need to move before they flank us," I told my team, my voice steady despite the calculations running through my mind. "Werner, help Klein. Neumann and Bauer, establish suppressive fire positions. We withdraw down the wash, then east toward the ridge. Move now." As my men executed the plan with the precision that endless training had instilled, I felt the weight of command like a physical burden. There were no heroes here, no glory, no dramatic speeches, just 5 men trying to survive another day. In a war that most Germans back home scarcely acknowledged, we would fight, we would endure, We would complete our mission, not for abstract ideals or political objectives, but for each other. The simple, brutal truth of combat stripped away everything but that most primitive loyalty. I aimed my rifle toward the distant sniper position and squeezed the trigger, adding my own fire to our withdrawal. The harsh recoil against my shoulder was the only certainty in a world suddenly reduced to the next breath, the next step, the next 20 kilometers through enemy territory. Our mission had begun 36 hours earlier at the German military base in Mazar-e-Sharif. Unlike the sprawling American installations with their pizza huts and fitness centers, the German compound maintained a Spartan efficiency reflective of our country's more limited commitment to the Afghan conflict. While publicly focused on reconstruction and training Afghan security forces, Germany's KSK operated in the shadows, conducting missions that would never appear in official reports or media briefings. Hauptmann Lehmann, our company commander, had summoned me to the secure planning room where maps of Badakhshan province covered the walls. An area of northern Afghanistan nominally under German responsibility, Badakhshan's remote valleys and mountain passes had increasingly become transit routes for Taliban fighters and weapons. Intelligence indicates increased movement through these valleys, Lehmann explained, tracing a route on the topographical map. Satellite imagery shows new paths being used that bypass our observation posts. We need ground-level confirmation of what's moving through there and in what numbers. The mission parameters were straightforward. A 5-man team would insert via helicopter at night, patrol through the suspected transit routes, gather intelligence, and extract 36 hours later. Simple on paper, like most plans that disintegrate upon contact with reality. Rules of engagement are passive, Lehmann continued. Observe and report only. Engage only if directly threatened. I studied the terrain carefully. The insertion point was in relatively open ground, requiring a night movement of several kilometers to reach our initial observation position. The proposed route took us through narrow valleys and across exposed ridgelines, difficult terrain that offered minimal cover and numerous ambush positions. The Americans have assets in adjacent sectors, Lehmann added, noting my concern. Quick reaction force is available if absolutely necessary, but political considerations make that a last resort. This remains a German operation. Those political considerations were well understood but seldom discussed. Germany's participation in Afghanistan existed in a precarious balance, maintaining alliance commitments while avoiding actions that might inflame domestic opposition to the war. Special operations occurred under strict limitations, with success measured as much by avoiding controversy as by achieving objectives. I selected my team carefully. Feldwebel Neumann, our best marksman. Stabsunteroffizier Bauer, communications. Specialist, Feldwebel Werner, explosive ordnance expert. And Stabsunteroffizier Klein, our team medic. All were veterans of multiple deployments, men who could operate effectively under the ambiguous conditions that defined our missions. We departed at 0200 hours, the helicopter maintaining low altitude to avoid detection. The pilot, a taciturn, Bundeswehr major with thousands of flight hours, deposited us precisely at the designated landing zone before disappearing into the night sky. The sudden silence following the helicopter's departure was absolute, the kind of silence that exists only in remote mountains, where human presence remains an aberration rather than the norm. We moved out immediately, navigating by GPS and night vision toward our first observation point. The temperature dropped sharply as we gained elevation, the thin mountain air burning in our lungs. Each man carried approximately 35 kilograms of equipment, weapons, ammunition, communications gear, survival supplies, and mission-specific items. The weight was a constant companion, simultaneously burdensome and reassuring in its lethal functionality. By dawn, we had established our first observation position overlooking a narrow valley that intelligence had identified as a potential transit route. The position offered good fields of view, while providing concealment from casual observation. Using specialized optics, we documented the terrain features, potential defensive positions, and signs of recent activity. Trail shows recent use, Neumann reported, examining disturbed soil patterns through his scope. Multiple individuals, within the last 48 hours. Direction, I asked. North to south, consistent with movement from the Pakistani border, before. Maintained our observation for 6 hours, documenting a small group of civilians with pack animals who passed through the valley without incident. Their behavior appeared normal for local herders, though we photographed them nonetheless for later analysis. In Afghanistan, the line between civilian and combatant was often invisible until the moment of confrontation. At midday, we moved to our second observation position, following a route that kept us below ridgelines to avoid silhouetting against the sky. The terrain was brutal, loose scree that threatened to trigger landslides with each step, narrow passes that created natural choke points, elevation changes that sapped strength and slowed movement. Afghanistan's geography was a weapon in itself, wearing down invaders as it had for centuries. Our second position yielded more significant findings. Through high-powered optics, we observed a group of 6 armed men moving with tactical discipline, not local militia or hunters, but trained fighters carrying modern weapons, including at least 1 PKM machine gun. We documented their movement, equipment, and direction, transmitting encrypted images to headquarters via satellite communication. The mission continued according to plan until the 3rd day, when we departed our final observation position to begin the movement toward our extraction point. The route took us through a valley that reconnaissance satellites had shown to be sparsely populated and infrequently traveled. Intelligence had assessed the area as low threat, an assessment that proved catastrophically wrong when the first sniper round narrowly missed my head. After the initial contact, we executed our withdrawal under fire, moving from cover position to cover position while maintaining suppressive fire. Klein's wound complicated our movement. He could walk with assistance, but couldn't move quickly or independently. The Taliban sniper, having revealed his position, was joined by additional fighters who began maneuvering to flank our position. "Contact left," Bauer called, engaging 3 fighters who had appeared on the ridgeline to our east. His G-36 chattered in disciplined bursts, forcing the Taliban to seek cover. We continued our fighting withdrawal for nearly 2 kilometers, breaking contact when terrain features finally provided sufficient concealment. Once temporarily secure, I assessed Klein's wound more thoroughly. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his thigh, causing significant bleeding but missing major vessels and bone. Werner, applying his medical training, cleaned and bandaged the wound while administering morphine to manage the pain. "I can move," Klein insisted, his face pale but determined. "Just need to keep pressure off it." We fashioned a crude walking stick from a broken tent pole and continued our movement, now well off our planned route and still 18 kilometers from extraction. The day's heat was oppressive, easily exceeding 35 degrees Celsius, with minimal shade available. In the barren landscape, water conservation became critical. We had planned for 36 hours, but our detour and reduced pace meant those supplies would be stretched dangerously thin. Radio communication with headquarters confirmed what we already suspected. No immediate support was available. 2 American helicopters had been damaged in operations elsewhere, and the German assets were committed to scheduled operations that had political priority. We were on our own until we reached our extraction point, or until the situation deteriorated so severely that the political cost of losing a KSK team outweighed other considerations. We maintained movement through the night, I decided after conferring with the team. Use terrain features for concealment. Avoid all populated areas and known routes. The night brought its own challenges, temperatures dropping to near freezing, terrain that became treacherous without visual references, and the constant risk of Taliban fighters with local knowledge of paths and approaches. We moved slowly, navigating by GPS and the ambient light of a quarter moon. Klein's condition began to deteriorate, fever indicating the onset of infection despite the antibiotics from our medical kit. Shortly before dawn, we encountered a shepherd boy tending goats on a hillside. The child, no more than 10 years old, stared at us with a mixture of curiosity and fear. The moment crystallized the fundamental dilemma of counterinsurgency operations. This boy could easily alert nearby Taliban to our presence, yet he was a non-combatant whom our rules of engagement prohibited us from harming. "Neumann, the chocolate. From your rations," I ordered quietly. Understanding immediately, Neumann retrieved the chocolate bar from his pack and offered it to the boy with a gesture to remain silent. The child accepted the treat with wide eyes, nodding his agreement. Whether he would honor that implicit pact remained to be seen, but we had few alternatives that didn't cross lines we weren't prepared to cross. We continued our movement, now pushing beyond normal human endurance. Klein's wound had significantly slowed our pace, and the detour had added kilometers to our journey. Each man felt the effects of extended combat operations, physical exhaustion, heightened alertness that prevented true rest, the accumulating stress of operating in hostile territory with limited support. 10 kilometers from our extraction point, we encountered a 3-man Taliban patrol moving along a ridgeline that paralleled our route. They hadn't seen us yet, but their position dominated the most direct path to our objective. After a brief assessment, I decided on an ambush, a calculated violation of our observe and report rules of engagement, but necessary given Klein's deteriorating condition and our dwindling supplies. We established positions overlooking the patrol's route, using the terrain for concealment. When the fighters passed below our position, we engaged simultaneously on my signal. The firefight lasted less than 10 seconds. 3 Taliban fighters neutralized without casualties to our team. We documented the engagement, collected intelligence, materials from the bodies, and continued our movement, knowing that the sound of gunfire might attract additional enemy forces. The final 8 kilometers to extraction was a blur of pain and determination. Klein now moved with extreme difficulty, alternately supported by Werner and Bauer. Our water was gone, ammunition reduced to emergency reserves, and communication with headquarters increasingly sporadic as battery power diminished. The extraction point, a flat area suitable for helicopter landing, seemed simultaneously close enough to offer hope and distant enough to despair. We reached the position at 0345 hours, establishing a defensive perimeter and confirming our arrival through encrypted burst transmission. The response was concerning. Extraction would be delayed by at least 90 minutes due to mechanical issues with the primary helicopter. We would need to hold our position, conserve ammunition, and pray that local Taliban hadn't tracked our movement. Those 90 minutes stretched into the longest of my life. Klein's condition continued to worsen, his skin hot with fever despite the cool pre-dawn air. Our defensive position was adequate but not ideal, offering good fields of fire, but limited concealment from observation. Each unusual sound, each shadow movement in the darkness, triggered immediate responses from men operating on the ragged edge of endurance. When the distinctive sound of the helicopter finally reached us, the relief was physical, a tangible release of tension that had sustained us through the previous hours. The pilot executed a textbook landing under night vision, the loadmaster directing us aboard with practiced efficiency. Within 30 seconds, we were airborne, climbing sharply away from the extraction zone as dawn broke over the mountains. Seated on the hard metal bench of the helicopter, I surveyed my team. Klein was receiving intravenous fluids from Werner, his face drawn with pain but alive. Neumann stared blankly at nothing, his body present but his mind still processing the events of the past days. Bauer had already fallen asleep, his exhaustion finally overcoming the hypervigilance of combat. 4 of my 5 men were returning, a success by the cruel mathematics of war. The mission itself would be judged successful as well. We had gathered valuable intelligence on Taliban movement patterns, documented new transit routes, and confirmed the presence of trained fighters in areas previously considered secure. This information would inform future operations and potentially save lives, though whether those operations would make any difference in the broader conflict remained unanswerable. As the helicopter carried us back toward Mazar-e-Sharif, I reflected on the fundamental truths that extended from the world wars my grandfather had fought in to this remote corner of Afghanistan. The technology had changed, the political context had evolved, but the essential experience remained constant. Men enduring extreme conditions, facing mortality with quiet determination, and fighting primarily for each other rather than abstract causes. There were no heroes in our story, no dramatic last stands or glorious charges, just professionals doing difficult work with methodical competence, surviving through training, equipment, and the unbreakable bonds formed in combat. The 20 kilometers we had traversed would never appear in history books or medal citations, existing only in the memories of 5 German soldiers who had walked through hell together and emerged on the other side. That, perhaps, was the most honest measure of modern warfare, not territory gained or strategic objectives achieved, but the simple, brutal distance between danger and safety, and the men who walked that ground one careful step at a time. Master Sergeant Robert Keller, 34 years old, 3rd Special Forces Group, Operational Detachment Alpha, born in Fargo, North Dakota. The blood freezes almost instantly on my beard, crimson droplets turning to ice crystals within seconds. At this altitude, everything behaves differently. My lungs burn with each labored breath as I drag myself behind the jagged outcropping, 14,300 feet above sea level, where the air is so thin, it feels like breathing through a coffee straw. The bullet wound in my thigh pulses with each heartbeat, but the cold numbs the worst of it. Behind me, Martinez works feverishly to establish comms with the QRF 20 miles away. His fingers, clumsy and bulky gloves, fumble with the sat phone antenna. Still nothing, he hisses through clenched teeth. 30 meters below our position, Taliban fighters navigate the treacherous mountain path with the sure-footedness of mountain goats. They've lived their entire lives at these altitudes. This is their domain. We're the aliens here, struggling just to keep our synapses firing in the oxygen-deprived conditions. I chamber another round in my Mk-12, the metal parts grinding against each other as ice forms in the mechanism. We've been compromised for 6 hours now. 6 hours since they hit our observation post. 6 hours since we lost Williams and Dela Cruz. 6 hours of running a fighting retreat up the spine of this god-forsaken mountain. I press my eye against the scope, trying to steady my breathing despite the altitude sickness clawing at my consciousness. They're coming, and we're running, out of mountain to climb. 3 days earlier, we'd inserted via MH-47 Chinook under the cover of darkness. Our 12-man ODA team, plus 4 Afghan commandos from the ANA's 6th Special Operations Kandak. The mission brief had been straightforward. Establish observation posts along the high ridges of the Hindu Kush to monitor movement through the valleys below. Intelligence suggested Al-Qaeda fighters were using these remote mountain passes to transport weapons and fighters from Pakistan. Captain Reynolds, our team leader, had split us into 3 elements. My team drew the highest observation post, OP Condor, situated on a narrow ridge at 14,800 feet. As we offloaded from the helicopter, the extreme thin air hit me like a sledgehammer. Even with months of high altitude, training back at Fort Carson, nothing fully prepares you for the disorienting reality of operating in what mountaineers call the death zone. "Remember your altitude protocols," Reynolds shouted over the whump 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 of the departing Chinook's rotors. "Check each other for signs of haze or hape. Stay hydrated. We rendezvous in 72 hours. We watched as the other elements disappeared into the darkness, each heading toward their designated observation posts at slightly lower elevations. My 4-man team, me, Martinez, Williams, and Dela Cruz, began the grueling climb to our position. Each step required deliberate focus. Our rucksacks, laden with equipment, ammunition, and supplies, felt twice as heavy in the thin atmosphere. "This is some real mountain warfare shit," Williams muttered as we paused to catch our breath. Below us, the valleys disappeared into darkness, punctuated by the occasional pinprick of light from remote villages. "The Soviets lost entire companies up here back in the 80s, Martinez added. "Guys would just sit down from exhaustion and never get back up." "That's real comforting, Martinez," Dela Cruz chuckled, though the laughter quickly dissolved into a coughing fit. We reached our observation post shortly before dawn, a small natural cave with a commanding view of 3 converging valleys. Perfect. Sight lines for monitoring movement below, but also exposed and difficult to defend if compromised. We established our hide position, setting up surveillance equipment and communications gear. The temperature hovered around 5 degrees Fahrenheit, but the wind chill pushed it well below 0. "I've got comms with base," Martinez reported after, wrestling with the satellite antenna. "Signal's weak but stable, For the next 36 hours, we maintained around-the-clock surveillance, rotating 2-hour shifts. Sleep came in brief, restless bursts, our bodies never fully acclimating to the altitude. Even the simplest tasks, eating, reloading magazines, writing in the log, required conscious effort. Our movements were sluggish, our thinking clouded. High-altitude cerebral edema was a constant threat, potentially fatal swelling of the brain that could kill even the fittest operator within hours. On the second night, Williams spotted movement in the northern valley. Through the thermal scope, we counted 17 figures moving cautiously along a goat path. They carried distinctive long-barreled weapons, likely PKMs and RPKs. Sierra 2-6, this is Condor. We have eyes on 17 tangos moving through objective area whiskey. Direction of travel south-southeast. Armed individuals appear to be carrying crew-served weapons. Over. I kept my voice low as I transmitted. To Captain Reynolds at the command post. Condor, Sierra 2-6. Solid copy. Continue monitoring and report any changes. Do not engage unless compromised. QRF is on standby. Over. Sierra 2-6 Condor. Wilco. Out. We tracked the group for 4 hours as they made their way through the valley, eventually disappearing into a small village. Throughout the night, we observed 3 more groups following the same route. Something big was happening. A buildup of forces we hadn't anticipated. Dawn brought clear skies and improved visibility. Dela Cruz on watch while the rest of us tried to sleep, suddenly tensed. Movement. Western approach. 300 meters and closing. I scrambled to the observation position, ignoring the dizziness that accompanied any sudden movement at this altitude. Through my binoculars, I spotted 6 figures ascending toward our position. They moved with the practiced efficiency of fighters accustomed to mountain warfare. They're searching for something, Williams whispered. Look at the patrol pattern. Or someone, Martinez added grimly. We had been compromised. I keyed the radio to alert command. Sierra 2-6 Condor. We have multiple armed individuals approaching our position. Appears our location may be compromised. Request immediate guidance. Over. Static filled the channel for several agonizing seconds before Captain Reynolds' voice broke through. Condor, Sierra 2-6. Fall back to extraction point Bravo. QRF cannot reach your position due to weather conditions at lower elevations. Nearest. Support is Echo Team. Approximately 5 clicks southeast of your position. Over. Sierra 2-6. Condor. Understood. Moving to extraction point Bravo. Over. We quickly broke down essential equipment, destroying anything we couldn't carry. The approaching fighters were now within 200 meters, still unaware of our exact position but closing fast. We move along the ridge line, I instructed. Stay low, maintain spacing. If we get separated, rally at the extraction point. We had just cleared the cave when the first shots rang out. Sharp cracks echoed across the mountainside as rounds impacted. Around us, Williams fell immediately, a bullet catching him in the back of the neck, an instantly fatal wound. Dela Cruz dragged me behind a boulder as Martinez returned fire. They've got us bracketed, Martinez shouted over the gunfire. The firefight was brief but intense. In the thin air, our movements were labored, our aim affected by the altitude. Dela Cruz took a round through the chest while attempting to flank the enemy position. He died, in minutes, drowning in his own blood as his punctured lung collapsed. Martinez and I managed to break contact, using smoke grenades to cover our withdrawal along the ridgeline. The Taliban fighters pursued relentlessly, seemingly unaffected by the altitude that was slowly killing us. Every few hundred meters, we'd establish a hasty defense, engage the pursuing fighters, then continue our retreat higher into the mountains. Sati, nightfall. We had put some distance between us and our pursuers, but we'd also been pushed farther from our extraction point. The temperature plummeted to -15 degrees. Without shelter, hypothermia became as dangerous an enemy as the Taliban. We need to keep moving, I told Martinez, though every fiber of my being screamed for rest. If we stop now, we'll freeze to death. The QRF, Martinez began, his speech slurred from cold and altitude sickness. They can't reach us yet. Weather's got the helicopters grounded. We make for Echo Team's position at first light. We spent that night in constant movement, stopping only briefly to melt snow for water. The cold seeped into our bones and the altitude played tricks on our minds. I found myself having conversations with Williams before remembering he was dead. Martinez began seeing people who weren't there, a common symptom of cerebral edema. Dawn broke clear and brutally cold. We oriented ourselves and began moving southeast toward Echo Team's last known position. Then the ambush hit us. They had flanked us during the night, using their knowledge of the terrain to get ahead of our position. The first burst of fire caught Martinez in the arm and shoulder, spinning him around. I took a round through the thigh, the bullet passing clean through muscle without hitting bone or artery. We retreated upward again, the only direction available to us, higher into the death zone, where even staying conscious became a battle. My sat phone was damaged in the firefight, and Martinez's radio had been lost somewhere during the night. We were alone, wounded, and running out of options, which brings me to this moment behind this rock, watching Martinez struggle with the sat phone, listening to the approaching footsteps of fighters born to this unforgiving environment, wondering if the last thing I'll ever see is the breathtaking vista of Afghanistan's highest peaks. Martinez suddenly sits up straighter, his eyes widening. "I've got something. Weak signal, but..." The radio crackles to life with a burst of static, then a familiar voice breaks through. "Repeat. Any Sierra elements, this is Dustoff 7-3. Inbound your position. Transmit identifier for homing. Over." A medevac helicopter, somehow flying despite conditions that had grounded the QRF. I grabbed the handset from Martinez. "Dustoff 7-3, this is Condor element. 2 packs, both wounded. Enemy forces closing on our position. We are marked with IR strobe," I say again. "Marked with IR strobe. Over. Condor. Dustoff 7-3. Copy all. ETA your position 3 minutes. Pop smoke when you hear us approach. Over. Wilco. Out." I turned to Martinez, a glimmer of hope breaking through the oxygen-deprived haze. 3 minutes. We just need to hold for 3 minutes. Martinez nods grimly, checking his remaining ammunition. 4 mags left, make 'em count. The Taliban fighters are closing in, using the terrain for cover as they advance up the slope toward our position. I count at least 12 of them, moving in coordinated pairs. They know we're here. They know we're wounded. I steady my breathing, as much as possible, lining up the first shot. At this altitude, ballistics are different. The thin air offers less resistance, changing the trajectory of bullets in ways that are difficult to calculate with an oxygen-starved brain. The first fighter moves into view, and I squeeze the trigger. The round catches him in the chest, dropping him instantly. His partner returns fire, forcing me back behind cover as bullets chip away at the rock. Martinez engages fighters attempting to flank our position, his burst of fire dropping one and sending others scrambling for cover. The exchange continues for what feels like hours but is merely seconds, each breath burning in my lungs, each movement requiring deliberate concentration. Then I hear it, the distant thump of helicopter rotors growing louder, the distinctive sound of a UH-60 Blackhawk straining against the thin mountain air. "Pop smoke!" I shout to Martinez, who pulls the pin on a green smoke grenade and tosses it into the open space behind us. The Taliban fighters, hearing the approaching helicopter, increase the intensity of their fire. They know their window is closing. A bullet grazes my cheek, sending a spray of warm blood across the frozen rock. The Blackhawk appears as if from nowhere, skimming the ridgeline with remarkable precision given the altitude. Under normal circumstances, this kind of operation would be impossible, the air too thin to generate sufficient lift for a hovering helicopter. But this pilot is attempting it anyway, bringing the aircraft to an unsteady hover 20 meters from our position. "Go!" I shout to Martinez, providing covering fire as he makes a stumbling run for the helicopter. The door gunner on the Blackhawk opens up with his M240, laying down suppressive fire that sends the Taliban fighters diving for cover. Martinez reaches the helicopter, helped aboard by the crew chief. I empty my magazine toward the enemy positions, then turn and run, each step a battle against gravity, thin air, and my wounded leg. The helicopter wavers dangerously in the turbulent air, the pilot fighting to maintain position as I close. The distance, 15 meters, 10, 5. The crew chief's outstretched hand seems miles away, but somehow I reach it, feeling his grip close around my wrist as he hauls me bodily into the aircraft. Go, go, go! The crew chief shouts, and the pilot banks away from the ridgeline as Taliban bullets ping off the helicopter's armored underbelly. As we pull away, I catch a final glimpse of our observation post, now overrun with fighters. The bodies of Williams and Dela Cruz remain where they fell, unretrievable in the chaos of our escape. The mountains of the Hindu Kush stretch endlessly below us, indifferent to the human drama that just played out upon their ancient slopes. Inside the helicopter, a flight medic works feverishly to stabilize Martinez, whose condition is deteriorating rapidly. I learn later that he suffered a tension pneumothorax, air trapped in his chest cavity from a punctured lung, a condition made more lethal by the extreme altitude. Your friends at Echo Team called it in, the crew chief shouts over the roar of the engines. Said they lost contact with you 12 hours ago. I nod numbly, too exhausted to speak. As we descend to lower altitude, oxygen floods back into my system, bringing with it a clarity that had been absent for days. The reality of what we endured, and what Williams and Dela Cruz sacrificed, settles heavily upon me. 3 days later, from a hospital bed at Bagram Airfield, I deliver my after-action report to a room full of solemn-faced intelligence officers. The information we gathered proved valuable, confirming the presence of high-level Al-Qaeda operatives moving through those mountain passes. A subsequent operation would target these routes, disrupting their network for months. But in the quiet, moments between debriefs and medical procedures, my mind returns to that ridgeline, to the thin air and the cold and the desperate fight for survival in Afghanistan's death zone, where the enemy isn't just the Taliban or Al-Qaeda, but the very environment itself. A war fought at the edges of human endurance, where every breath is a victory and the mountains claim more lives than bullets ever could.